Long ago, Achaea was the homeland of mages, a nation brimming with the most powerful magic users. But when humanity was stripped of this blessing, Achaea lost its former power, becoming a minuscule nation at the mercy of stronger powers. The nation placed its hopes on other means of survival, such as marriage alliances. It was evening. A young boy residing in a magnificent palace, Xander Catherial, the second prince of the kingdom of Achaea, ran into the room. He pleaded that the latest news must be a lie, trying to convince his elder sister that it wasn't too late to reconsider her decision. In the room were a young, blonde-haired girl and a man. The man told Xander to be quiet, as this conversation shouldn't be overheard. This was Dietrich Catherial, the Grand Prince of the Kingdom of Achaea. Xander exclaimed that it was unbelievable. How could they force his sister to become Canach Riadon's wife? Outside the palace walls, rumors about him were rampant, saying that Achaea had signed a pathetic peace agreement, selling their princess to a bloodthirsty tyrant who reveled in murder. Isbia Catherial, the Grand Princess of the Kingdom of Achaea, told her younger brother to calm down. She said it wasn't Dietrich who wanted this marriage, but her. It was entirely her own decision, so there was no need for such a fuss. Xander knelt by his sister's chair and cried. Isbia comforted him, saying that everything would be all right, but he must take care of their father, be a good boy, and listen to his elder brother. The boy sat on the girl's lap, sobbing loudly. Isbia stroked his head, trying to calm him. Dietrich watched all this in silence, then turned to his younger sister, thanking her for everything she was doing for the kingdom and the people of Achaea. Isbia pondered this. She had always known that marrying for love was a true luxury for a noble girl. This marriage alliance was the only way to protect Achaea from imminent danger, and now she would have to mourn her fate, as saving the nation was an honor for Isbia. Soon, the wedding took place. Isbia agreed to marry Canach Riadon, and the emperor agreed to take her as his wife. The girl dared not look up at her future husband, a tall, strong man with slightly bronzed skin. Soon, the priest, in the name of Fakar, goddess of creation and destruction, declared them husband and wife. Now their union would be sealed with a kiss of oath. Canach lifted the bride's veil, revealing her face. He told her to close her eyes and leaned closer to her lips. The next moment, the newlyweds merged in their first kiss. The kiss was short-lived, as the girl felt uncomfortable. As Canach pulled away from her, Isbia touched her lips as if she couldn't believe what had happened. However, she understood that they had made their oath, and from this day forward, there was no turning back. This man was her husband. After the ceremony, Canach's men and he himself prepared their horses and were ready to depart. Isbia sat in the carriage, feeling depressed. Even the wedding was held in a hurry, as if her husband had been stolen from her side. But given the current circumstances, it was understandable. This was a completely new kingdom, so the emperor couldn't be away from his country for long. Isbia wondered if this meant he prioritized his nation above all else. The girl opened the carriage window, thinking about her husband. There were rumors that he was a true tyrant, yet up close, he seemed like a deity. He commanded the respect of everyone around him, unlike her, an inexperienced young girl. Every generation of the Catherial family received the blessing of the Silver Forest Guardian, awakening a mage destined to unveil the deep-buried magical currents and protect the nation. In this generation, Isbia became the mage, but she received only a fraction of the magical power. The girl was plagued by one question: could she live up to the title of empress? She suspected that when the emperor grew tired of her, she would simply be discarded. These thoughts made her feel miserable. As the girl contemplated this, a stranger in a black coat watched her from behind a tree, a swirl of dark magic rotating in his hand. Suddenly, Isbia heard the crack of a breaking branch. She looked out the window, trying to see who was hiding behind the tree. But before she could even think, a magic arrow appeared before her. A terrible sound rang out, and moments later, the emperor and his men realized the carriage had been attacked. Isbia stumbled out, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth, an arrow embedded in her chest, right where her heart was. The girl convulsively clutched the wound, blood rapidly gushing out. At that moment, memories from not long ago flooded her mind. She, and her brother sitting in her palace. She was terrified. She didn't want to go to the Riadon Empire and marry Canach. The mere thought filled her with dread. But was there truly any other way to save their kingdom? Dietrich said it pained him to see his sister suffer. But what could they do? After all, Akia had almost no strength left to fight. Their warriors were exhausted, their supplies depleted, and there was simply nowhere left to retreat. Only a mage capable of protecting the nation could save them. This was the reality. They had to survive at all costs. And now, Isbia, dying with an arrow in her heart, understood that Dietrich had been right. If she had enough power to protect Akia back then, she could have at least made a difference, and none of this would have happened. Isbia almost lost consciousness when she suddenly heard someone calling her, urging her to open her eyes. This made the girl jump up with a scream. She didn't understand how she was able to do that, as she had just been struck by an arrow. Then she looked around, and behind her, she saw Canach holding her body in his arms. Isbia looked closely at her face, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth, her dress stained crimson. Then she realized that this girl was herself. The emperor's subjects urged him to let the girl go, as she was already dead. Canach grimly said that it was all his fault. He shouldn't have trusted those filthy northerners. He shouldn't have even agreed to these vile games. Isbia understood where this was going and tried to stop the emperor, but he couldn't hear her. Her voice seemed to dissipate into the void. Canach declared their alliance destroyed, that Akia would pay for his betrayal in blood. He walked towards his horse. He ordered everyone to go back and begin preparations for war immediately. Isbia tried to stop him, but he couldn't hear her. Then she ran after him. However, she couldn't get far from the carriage. Pain consumed her entire body. She felt as if she were being torn apart. She couldn't move. The bleeding wound in her chest was a searing reminder of its presence. Suddenly, Isbia heard someone's footsteps. It was a young man, and he said the kingdom would have to face its own destruction. Then he bent down to the pool of blood where Isbia's body had just lain. He began to lament, saying the poor girl was still breathing while bleeding out. She recognized the man as her brother, Dietrich. Overjoyed to see him, she immediately crawled towards him, hoping he would save her. At that moment, another man approached Dietrich and said that His Highness should be pleased with the execution of the plan. Dietrich smeared Isbia's blood on his fingers, saying he was very pleased. They had finally removed all obstacles. The girl was stunned. She simply couldn't believe her ears. Dietrich stood up and said it was best to see for himself if she was dead. The stranger said the arrow had struck her heart. Death was certain. Isbia was dumbfounded. She couldn't believe this was actually happening. Dietrich told the man that their deal wasn't over. He had allowed him to dispose of his sister because he had promised him the power to destroy the Riadon Empire. The stranger said he could rest assured. The protracted war would end with the victory of Akia. Dietrich's name would resound gloriously throughout the continent. Dietrich said he was displeased that Canach had taken Isbia's body, as she was a born mage, so even her corpse would be useful. Isbia couldn't understand why her beloved brother would do this to her. When the men left, she was left alone. She sat on the ground beside the carriage where she had been murdered. Just as Dietrich had said, war soon broke out again between Akia and the Riadon Empire, and Isbia became a ghost trapped in the forest where she was killed. It was pure hell. The girl couldn't find any explanation for the horrors she was forced to witness. She could only watch, as she could no longer change anything. But the war seemed to have no end. After accusing the Riadon Empire of murdering the princess, Dietrich planned to win by allying with a small northern nation. But Canach swiftly dealt with everyone, achieving victory after victory. He pushed Akia step by step towards despair. In the face of war, everything lost its meaning. The beautiful forests and fields of Akia, and everyone Isbia loved, all vanished before her eyes. The cold, stiff corpses of her father and her brother Xander, as if mocking her foolish death. In the third year of the war, Dietrich was captured and brought before Emperor Canach. He called him a fool and a pathetic slave. Canach had killed his entire family and seized his lands. But this was still not victory. The cathedral family would curse him forever. Seeing Dietrich Cathedral still defiant even in death, cursing him, Canach Riadon merely smirked at the man's screams to rid himself of his ghost. The next moment, he cut off Dietrich's head as Isbia's ghost watched. Canach Riadon's grim figure loomed over the body, blood dripping from his sword. He ordered his men to burn everything. After everyone left, Isbia bent down to look at her dead brother, his body lying on the ground amidst the bloody swords. She wondered if this was what he wanted, if his plans were more important than her, their younger brother, and their father. Then Isbia turned to the silver forest, hoping it would hear her cries and help her. She prayed for the forest to take her soul and give Akia another chance. She wanted a chance to turn back time. Suddenly, a bright light illuminated the sky, and a mysterious voice spoke to Isbia. It called her my dear child and whispered something in an unknown language. Then Isbia lost consciousness. She woke up in her family's palace with her father and Xander sitting by her bed. The moment she opened her eyes, they rushed to hug her. But Isbia didn't understand what was happening and how she got here. It all seemed so unreal to her. She had seen the corpses of her loved ones with her own eyes, their pale and lifeless faces, and now they were alive and well. Isbia's father told the physician that the princess had had a rough night, and he wondered if there would be any side effects after waking up. The physician said that everything would be all right. The princess's eye and hair color had changed, which was typical for mages, but this was the first time it had happened in the past 100 years, so they didn't know all the details. Then it dawned on her. Her magic had awakened when she was 10 years old, so it turned out she had returned to the past. But that couldn't happen. Isbia felt like she was going crazy, or maybe it was all just a hallucination. Then Xander leaned over her and asked her not to get sick again, because they should be together for as long as possible. The girl touched her brother's cheek. It was soft and warm. This was definitely not a dream. She lowered her head. Xander put his arm around her shoulders, not understanding what was happening. Isbia burst into tears. The Silver Forest had heard her plea. Then she hugged her brother tightly, holding him in her arms with all her love. She thanked the Silver Forest for giving her another chance and promised never to miss it. She promised to protect her family and her country at all costs. When Isbia calmed down and was alone, she began to think. For this, she needed a power stronger than any guardian. The patron deity of Akia was the Silver Forest, the younger sister of the goddess Faka. Reborn after death, she became a silver tree at the very edge of the world. The inhabitants of Akia began to pray to the Silver Forest for blessings, and those who received the blessing became the guardians of Akia. These heroes protected the kingdom from any danger. But the glorious days of Akia were over. Magic suddenly disappeared from the entire continent, and the forest's blessings disappeared too. Akia had no guardians left, and the country was on the verge of destruction. Isbia's awakening became the only hope for the people. They were glad that a guardian had finally appeared among them. She became a true treasure of the kingdom. However, it soon became known that Isbia could not use the necessary magic. As a guardian, all she could do was talk to trees and flowers. Perhaps something went wrong during the awakening. The trees were very friendly to her. They said that if she hadn't awakened magic, they couldn't have become friends with Isbia. She simply didn't realize how lucky she was. However, this didn't help the girl against the criticism of the people. In her past life, she could only watch the destruction of the kingdom, but now everything was different. If the Silver Forest had truly granted her wish, it must have also given her the power to protect the country. Isbia's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden bright light in the flower pot she used for magic practice. The next moment, a green sprout emerged from the soil. Isbia wondered if this was all she got, if she was resurrected just for this. If the Silver Forest hadn't granted her wish. Of course, now her magic was stronger than in her past life. However, it was still not enough to stop Canach Riadon. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Someone entered her room and called her name. Isbia immediately realized who it was. It was her brother, Dietrich. He stood at the door, smiling. Isbia timidly called his name and then rose from her chair, going to meet the man. Dietrich had heard that his sister had woken up. He also heard that she was in terrible pain after waking up. Isbia looked at her brother's face. She felt like she was back on the day she died, when she learned of his betrayal. She remembered his words, that even the body of a mage like Isbia was useful, and then she slapped his arm. She didn't want him to touch her. The girl immediately apologized for her actions, explaining that she hadn't yet come to her senses after waking up. She was very sensitive right now and hoped her brother would understand. Dietrich said that Isbia was clearly still recovering, that it looked like she had indeed been through a difficult time, and then he took her hand, saying that she would get better sooner or later. Isbia felt uncomfortable. Every move he made seemed like a performance to her, because now she knew her brother's true intentions. Dietrich said he had news that he didn't want to convey under these circumstances, but his heart ached. The fact was that Isbia had now become the new guardian, but many people were angry about it and still didn't believe in the blessing of the Silver Forest. They doubted whether the princess could really use magic. The girl felt indignant, but before she could say anything, Dietrich continued, saying he didn't think her magic was fictional, but he was interested in why such doubts had arisen in society. After all, Isbia was awakened by the Guardian, but still couldn't cast a single spell. However, he advised his sister not to blame herself. There was no need to put too much pressure on herself. The protagonist was confused about what was happening. Her brother's face and his words seemed strangely familiar to her, and then she remembered an episode from the past. She told her brother that she could use magic, that she spoke to the flowers in the garden, and they told her about their past. Back then, the girl thought that was her ability, but she didn't know what to do with it. Then Dietrich told her that it wasn't magic, but a silly trick. If people found out that the princess was so weak, they would be upset. He advised her to keep quiet about her powers. Only then could he protect her. People would whisper that the princess still couldn't use magic, but Dietrich assured her it was no big deal because he would take care of everything. Then the memory of her heart and the arrow that pierced it on her brother's orders flashed through Isbia's mind again. The protagonist felt a wave of dizziness. She took a step back, her hand resting on the table. The girl wanted to answer something, when suddenly she felt someone touch her shoulder. A woman's voice whispered in her ear. Isbia knew this would happen. She wouldn't be able to protect Akia and take revenge. The voice was Isbia's past self, her soul, trying to sow seeds of doubt in her reborn personality. The girl tried to convince herself that it was just a hallucination, and then the ghost said that the Silver Forest hadn't chosen Isbia, he just wanted her to go through all this hell again. The girl waved her hand, trying to drive the ghost away. Dietrich looked at her in surprise, but she said she was fine. Isbia decided she needed to go to the Silver Forest first. Even if he didn't intend to save her, she still needed to figure out what he wanted from her. Soon, the protagonist and her subjects arrived at the northern forest on the edge of the world. The men tried to dissuade the princess, because it wasn't safe here at all. She needed to go back. However, Isbia said she couldn't go back yet. Before this, the girl had told her father that she wanted to go to the Silver Forest. She believed she had awakened, so she needed to go there. However, her father objected, saying that the Silver Forest didn't allow anyone but the king of Akia to enter, and even the king was only allowed to visit once. The Silver Forest wasn't always merciful. Sometimes it was gentle, and sometimes it was fierce like a winter blizzard. There was once a man who knelt on the ground, begging for Isbia's mother to be resurrected, but the forest didn't hear his desperate prayers. The resurrection of the dead went against the principles of the goddess Faka. Then the man bore his grief alone, his limbs freezing in the cold. However, Isbia promised that if a blizzard came, she would return. Her father didn't have to worry, because she was the guardian of Akia, the princess blessed by the forest. The girl believed the goddess wouldn't harm her. She should tell her how to save the kingdom. Then the man hinted that the forest itself was inviting Isbia. He took something out of his pocket and handed it to his daughter. It was a heat-preserving pendant made by dwarves, which the man had bought for his deceased wife and now hoped it would help his daughter. Now, as Isbia was in the forest, she clutched the pendant tightly. Thanks to it, her body remained warm. She thanked her father in her heart for his help. Isbia never wanted to lose her loved ones again. She intended to change her fate. Now she had only one option left. Perhaps she didn't have much magical power, but she remembered how to use it correctly. Isbia intended to use her only ability to communicate with the trees of the forest, so they would let her in. The princess's subjects suddenly noticed the weather turning foul. A blizzard was approaching. Isbia understood. Clearly, the forest had hurt her. She asked her subjects to wait for her there, and then she walked into the depths of the forest alone. It was much colder in the wilderness. The frost bit at her skin. Suddenly, she heard a voice. Someone was calling Isbia's name, calling her their child. The princess looked up and saw a large tree with silver leaves. She realized it was the Silver Forest. The voice said that they had finally met again, and then asked what had brought her here. Isbia felt that the voice was very familiar. Hearing it was like returning to the past. Then the princess decided to ask the goddess Faka why she had been resurrected and what she needed to do to avoid the terrible end she so feared. She had already made a promise and was ready to keep it. She just needed the strength to protect her country. Then suddenly, a voice said that Isbia seemed to have completely misunderstood. The goddess had been watching her all this time, but hadn't heard her pleas. This was a privilege only the king possessed, and she knew it. Isbia was confused. She was sure she had heard the goddess's voice. She thought she had been resurrected to fulfill her promise. Then the voice told her to go home. Her body was too weak for such severe cold, and the pendant would soon lose its effect. She needed to return to her father. However, Isbia declared that it didn't matter to her. She would rather die here than watch her people perish while she remained powerless. The voice tried to dissuade her, but she wouldn't budge. She knelt down and said she wanted to protect the country herself. She begged the goddess to tell her what to do. Then the voice said that Isbia left her no choice. Although she was a guardian, her power was weak. This was all because the goddess's power was depleted, and so the goddess was partly responsible for Isbia's difficult past. The goddess said she would share her life force with Isbia. Perhaps she could save Akia's future. Suddenly, Isbia heard another, more sinister voice. It said that the goddess could not be trusted. The Silver Forest said that nothing could stop her now. She must follow the call of her heart, and she would succeed. But the voice of Isbia's past ghost stopped her. It said that although she had become stronger, she was still destined for a tragic end, just like in her past life. Then Isbia said that if this was her fate, so be it. She pressed her palms to the ground, pouring all her strength into them. Then green roots grew out of the snow, the fruit of her magic. She said she was tired of being afraid, so she would not give up on her goal. The story continues sometime after Isbia's visit to the Silver Forest. At an outpost, there was a quarrel between the guards. One had fallen asleep on duty, and the other was very displeased. Their argument was interrupted. Walking at the head of the group and entering the gate was Her Highness, Isbia Catherial. She was now 20 years old. The guard immediately ran to greet her. He reported that after she had sealed the border, there had been far fewer victims. The thorn vines protected the walls perfectly. The arrows and shields made from them had proven effective against the monsters. The man said it sounded amusing, but sometimes he felt like he and Isbia were comrades who had been through the entire war together. When she heard the word war, Isbia smiled nervously. Images from her past life flashed through her mind again, the time when she looked down at the bodies of her dead father and brother. Then she said that the guard was much smarter than he tried to appear. 10 years had passed since Isbia returned to the past. The Silver Forest had made her stronger. She had gained the ability to accelerate the growth of flowers, grass, and trees. She had learned to defend against monsters with magically infused barriers and arrows. Although Isbia's whole body screamed from overexertion, she knew she couldn't relax. However, even in this life, she had already heard terrible news about the Riadon Emperor. They were expanding their borders too quickly and would soon reach their country. Under Isbia's leadership, the army had become stronger, but they were still too weak to resist Canach. However, the princess was determined. She would not give up, and she would not let him destroy Akia. Suddenly, the conversation between the princess and the man was interrupted by another guard, who said a letter had arrived from the Empire. It was written personally by Emperor Canach. Isbia tensed. She was determined to protect the country at all costs, even if she had to marry the man. In his letter, Canach stated he had only one demand, the Achaean princess. Everything else they could keep. The rulers of the country were outraged that this man so shamelessly asked for Isbia's hand, but they didn't want to give the princess to the barbarian. The protagonist looked indifferently at their displeasure. These were the people who easily got rid of her in her past life, but now protected her, knowing she was useful. The only thing that hadn't changed was Canach's demand, a man who rose from slavery to become emperor. Perhaps his past was even worse than Isbia's, and now she wondered if that was the reason why he became so cruel. However, the girl decided it was none of her business. Then Dietrich joined the conversation. He said nothing was more painful than sending his beloved sister to a foreign land. But as the king of Achaea, he had to put the country first. Isbia noted how beautifully her brother spoke, yet he was planning to get rid of her. Dietrich turned to his sister and asked if she understood the reasons for such a decision, as she was the guardian of their country. The girl replied that she understood everything, stating she had been waiting for this opportunity her whole life. A week later, Late at night, he came to Isbia's room, saying he just wanted to say goodbye before she left. Dietrich said they wouldn't see each other again anytime soon, but the girl said he'd better get straight to the point. Then he tossed a pendant with a dark blue stone onto the table. Dietrich said it was a communication crystal. A spell could establish contact from a distance. He demanded Isbia take it to the Empire and report everything she could learn about the Emperor. Dietrich said that the marriage being a condition of the peace treaty was a lie. In fact, it was the ideal way to buy time to prepare. Then Isbia cried out, because if the Emperor found out, it wouldn't end well for anyone, and war could break out. The man just grinned. It turned out they were already preparing for war, which was why he had come to his sister. Isbia couldn't believe her ears, but her brother continued. He said they would wait until the Empire let its guard down. They had already allied with the northern countries, and besides, they had a very powerful ally. If well prepared, killing Canach would be a piece of cake. Isbia thought she should have guessed all this because Dietrich hadn't gotten those magical items out of thin air. It was impossible to create such things without magical power. This meant he was again in contact with those who had killed her in her past life. Dietrich was trying to create a northern alliance, which would bring chaos to the entire continent. Isbia understood that if she refused him, he would start a war by killing her. She didn't understand if there was any way for her to avoid such a fate. The protagonist thought her efforts were enough to stop Dietrich, but could it be that she really couldn't change the future? The man asked if his sister really thought marrying Canach would solve all their problems. When he realized the girl was going to answer in the affirmative, he called her a fool and handed her the secret documents he'd brought specifically for her. Dietrich declared that the Guardian of Achaea was destined for only one fate. Becoming the Guardian inevitably carried the burden of serving the Silver Forest. Outside the kingdom, Isbia wouldn't be able to use her power, and it would be impossible to pass on magic through her descendants. He claimed the Silver Forest had deprived the girl of the ability to bear children. Isbia immediately said it was a lie. However, Dietrich claimed it was true. Only the king had access to the archives, and these documents were hidden in a secret library. When Canach learned that his chosen bride was barren, his disappointment would be immeasurable. Dietrich said he would fly into a rage and raze Achaea to the ground. Then Isbia pushed her brother away, saying he was lying and she didn't want to hear anymore. But the man continued to stand his ground. He said the documents didn't mention the Guardian's children at all. The protagonist was terrified. Although she didn't want to believe it, it was likely true, and then she could only await her tragic end. Meanwhile, the story shifted to a beautiful spring bathed in sunlight. The Emperor's aide said there were a lot of bandits here, so one shouldn't walk around without armor. Canach demanded they bring him clothes quickly, as he couldn't meet the princess looking like this. Soon, the day of Isbia and Canach's wedding arrived. The girl stood on the palace balcony. A maid immediately ran up to her and covered the bride's shoulders with a cloak, as it was cold. She didn't understand why the princess was so pale on her wedding day. As Isbia recalled the night her brother left, she had spent the entire night looking through the archives. Dietrich's words proved to be true. There was no mention of the Guardian's children at all. All mages can give birth to capable children, which is why the Riadon Empire is so insistent on marrying Isbia. They want to raise an heir with magical abilities. But Guardians are different from ordinary mages. Their magic is a blessing bestowed by the Silver Forest. You can't be born with it. So Dietrich was right. All Guardians are barren. Isbia won't be able to bear children. But once the Emperor finds this out, the peace treaty will be terminated. She was pulled from her thoughts by the screams of people reporting that the Emperor of Riadon had arrived to conclude the marriage alliance. Isbia looked out from the balcony. Men on horseback were passing below her. The guards ordered the capital gates to be opened and the ruler to be received with full honors. Then the protagonist realized that this was truly her future husband, Canach Riadon. When the girl returned to her room, she began to think about what to do. This marriage was destined to be short-lived. She wouldn't be able to stop Canach's invasion. Last night, Dietrich had tried to use her for his own purposes. Instead of killing her like in her past life, he'd even told her the truth about the rulers. He must have thought Isbia was a useful pawn. This gave her an advantage, because as long as she was useful, he wouldn't be able to easily get rid of her. And now, the protagonist needed to show the Emperor the same thing. She needed to cast aside her frivolity. He must not discover the Guardian's secret. Isbia was interrupted from her thoughts by the sound of the door opening. Canach stood on the threshold. Although the girl was surprised by his presence here, she quickly composed herself and said it was an honor to meet the Emperor in person. Suddenly, Canach extended his palm and touched her hair. Then he abruptly declared that the girl didn't seem too happy about their engagement. Isbia immediately stated that this wasn't true at all. She was very happy to accept the marriage with the emperor. Canach grinned, saying her lies were sweeter than a kiss. The protagonist said that she would never lie to his majesty, but the man told her not to call him that. He didn't like all these formalities. He wanted the girl to call him by his name if it wasn't difficult for her. Isbia didn't understand what was happening. Did he treat her this way in her past life too? Then Canach asked his bride if she could call him by his name if he, in turn, called her Isbia. The protagonist was speechless. She didn't remember the man being like this in her past life. Canach Riadon hadn't even come to see her before the wedding, let alone call her by her name. Such a long silence puzzled the emperor. He thought the girl didn't know his name. However, Isbia said that she knew him and then timidly uttered the emperor's name, Canach. The time for the wedding ceremony was approaching. The maids looked at their princess with tears in their eyes. Isbia looked stunning in her white wedding dress. Some of the maids couldn't hold back their tears. They said the princess deserved better, that she should have a more elegant dress. But the protagonist thought to herself that this dress was already quite elegant compared to the one she wore at her wedding in her past life. The girl understood that a wedding wasn't a battlefield, but risking her life to go to another country was no joke either. Her future husband married her, expecting an heir capable of using magic. Isbia knew that she could only protect her people by making them believe she could give them what they wanted. Soon, the priest declared the newlyweds husband and wife. Now it was time to seal the union with a vow kiss. Isbia looked at her husband, noticing that he looked the same as always, without a single blemish on his face. Back then, he seemed like a god to her, but after experiencing everything in the war, she no longer felt any flutter in her chest. This wasn't a marriage, just a means to achieve peace. Therefore, she didn't care how Canach would treat her. Then the man leaned over to his wife and gave her an insistent, urgent kiss. Suddenly, Isbia stopped him. The guests watched everything that was happening, including the protagonist's brother, Dietrich. Isbia was confused. She thought her heart wouldn't race anymore, but her body wouldn't obey. Canach held the girl tightly in his arms and asked if she was all right, but Isbia just nodded silently. This time, there was no wedding hustle and bustle. It seemed to Isbia that the servants packing her belongings for the move were even more hurried than last time. The protagonist looked back at the castle where she had lived her whole life and clutched the communication crystal in her hand. She immediately heard Dietrich's voice. He said that his sister had made the right choice by contacting him. Her decision would help them save Akia. Isbia noted that it all sounded depressing. The emperor interrupted her thoughts. He called out to the girl, approaching her from behind. Isbia thought that if they didn't have children in the next few years, Canach would understand her infertility, and then her and Dietrich's plan would fail. Canach silently watched the girl, then chuckled mysteriously. Then he turned around and said he would go with Isbia. He knew it wasn't the custom here. Usually the bride and groom wouldn't ride in the same carriage, but he was so worried that he simply couldn't leave the girl. Canach knelt by the carriage steps, extending his hand to the girl, inviting her in. Isbia didn't know how to react. Then the man asked her not to make the emperor kneel for so long. The girl still took her husband's hand, thinking that this was so strange. Everything now was completely different from her past life. Canach had come to see her before the wedding, and now he was kneeling in front of her. She needed to remain indifferent, but she still had a strange feeling. Isbia didn't know where all this would lead. It could be a good sign or a bad one. As the carriage set off, the girl kept looking out the window. Canach noticed that the girl was still sad, and he asked her if she was unwell or if she was thinking about escaping an unwanted marriage contract. Isbia immediately became angry. The reason was chosen extremely absurdly. From now on, she was the emperor's wife and had to fulfill her duties. Canach chuckled and asked if all princesses were really so devoted, if she really thought it was her duty to kiss a man she didn't like. Isbia decided to ask her husband the reason for these questions. It seemed to her that he thought the girl couldn't stand him. Then Canach said that he had long wanted to ask his bride what she thought of him. Isbia nervously clutched the fabric of her dress, saying that Emperor Riadon was a true hero. Stories about him had reached her ears even before the wedding, and she had also heard about his origins. Canach just waved his hand. He didn't care what others said behind his back. He was interested in what Isbia herself thought of him. Did she really think he was a hero too? Suddenly, images from her past life flashed before the girl's eyes again. She remembered Canach's face stained with the blood of others. Then she looked at the man, but couldn't give him a definite answer. Canach sighed wearily. Everything was as he expected. They were already married, and Isbia was still wary of him. After the ceremony, she was as pale as snow. Apparently his guess was right. This marriage was a mistake. Isbia realized that with this attitude, the man might break off the marriage contract, but she couldn't let him do that. So she rose from her seat and said loudly that he had completely misunderstood. She wasn't unhappy about the marriage at all. Canach immediately told her to return to her seat, because if the carriage suddenly stopped, the girl might fall. Before the emperor finished speaking, the horses suddenly reared and neighed, and the carriage stopped. Isbia immediately swayed and lost her balance. She was ready to fall when Canach suddenly caught her, holding his bride in his arms. He asked if she was hurt. Isbia stared blankly ahead, her cheeks flushed. Canach looked at her face with concern and asked what was wrong. The girl just continued to remain silent, and then the emperor thought she was unwell. Just then, one of the emperor's aides approached the carriage, and Canach asked him why they had stopped. The man said the road was blocked by a fallen tree. Their people were already clearing the road, so they would be able to set off again soon. Canach was surprised. The tree had been standing fine when they approached Achaia, and it had suddenly fallen. The man turned his attention to Isbia, who was trembling all over, pale, and desperately clutching her chest. All sorts of thoughts flooded Isbia's mind. The Guardian's power was bestowed by the Silver Forest, so she wouldn't be able to use it outside of Achaia. This was one of the secrets Dietrich had told her that night. The girl had thought it was all a lie, but now she realized it was true. She felt her power leaving her. Without magic, Isbia wouldn't be able to protect herself, especially if she was attacked. Then she heard the voice of her past ghost again, asking if her brother had deliberately sent her abroad. The voice said that it was all planned by him. He just wanted to get rid of his sister and start a war. And in the end, poor Isbia would die again. She was destined to suffer. The girl covered her ears with her hands, screaming that she didn't want to hear the ghost speak anymore. Seeing his wife like this, Canach immediately held her tightly in his arms, wiping away her tears and trying to calm her down. He told Isbia to take a deep breath and look around. She was safe. Canach said confidently that no one here could hurt the girl. Some time passed after this incident, and evening came. The royal carriage had approached the harbor, and then Canach decided to apologize. He said he'd been fretting over her all day, and their journey must have been all the more agonizing because of it. He tried to catch her attention, as she hadn't looked at him at all. Canach realized Isbia was against the marriage, but reality wasn't so easily accepted. However, no matter how she looked at him, he promised he wouldn't break off the engagement. He assured her that from now on, there would be peace between their two countries. Therefore, Isbia could stop looking at him with such fearful eyes. She simply stared at the emperor in silence, now understanding why he was acting so unlike his usual self. In her past life, they hadn't even spoken privately, so she never thought to get to know him better. Then Isbia said that when she said she had heard of Canach's accomplishments, she wasn't lying. Ironically, she started studying reports about him to better understand the enemy's weaknesses. But the more she learned about him, the more she began to doubt whether this was the same Canach she knew before. He had been a slave, fighting for freedom from the oppressive rule of the previous emperor. Isbia then stated that she wasn't afraid of Canach and was quite satisfied with their marriage agreement, also thanking him for helping her calm down. She deliberately addressed the emperor by his name, since he had asked to be called Canach. He looked at his wife in surprise, undoubtedly pleased to hear all of this. Suddenly, someone called out to the emperor, and he immediately looked out the window. Isbia also looked out the window, and then the coachman announced that the docks were visible. She stared in fascination at the docks, where several huge ships were moored. She realized the future had truly changed. She hadn't died, and the war between the empires had stopped. Now, the future was a mystery to Isbia. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that everything would be all right. She could feel it. Meanwhile, at the docks, two men hurried out to greet the carriage. One of them asked the other what he was thinking. The green-haired man was worried that the wedding ceremony had ended too abruptly. He couldn't believe the emperor had actually left immediately after the vows, because for a whole month, all he talked about was the wedding with the princess. The emperor's carriage had already left the forest. The green-haired man chuckled, saying in that case, they should go and see what kind of person the bride was. Soon, the carriage arrived at the docks. Isbia couldn't take her eyes off the huge ship nearby. Canach helped her out of the carriage, saying that ordinary ships couldn't handle the journey they had to undertake, so they chose this one. He also asked her to watch her step, as it was dark outside and she might fall. Isbia said that he worried too much, and that she was watching the road carefully. The next moment, her heel caught on a small stone, and she started to fall forward. However, Canach caught her again before she fell. He held her tightly in his arms. Isbia was embarrassed, but thanked him for his help. It seemed she really should be more careful. Then Canach put his arm around her shoulders and led her towards the ship so she wouldn't stumble again. Isbia said she could walk on her own, but the Emperor insisted, as she might twist her ankle. The green-haired man, who was already waiting for the newlyweds, remarked that this was quite a striking sight. He then apologized for not introducing himself earlier and said his name was Lord Aslan Venal, the Minister of the Interior of the Riadon Empire. Isbia knew who he was. Aslan, a man of humble origins, the son of an impoverished baron. He had pulled his family out of hardship through his own abilities. Life had taught him to judge people not by their origins, but by their merits, which also led him to notice Canach, who had once been an ordinary slave. As the Empire's strategist, he had led the revolutionary movement to victory, thus securing Canach's position. His name had also been mentioned in the archives, but now seeing him in person, Isbia felt like he was some sort of fictional character. Then Aslan asked if there was anything he could do for the newlyweds. Canach said that Aslan was not only his close friend, but also the Minister of the Interior, and such an acquaintance would definitely not be superfluous. Then Isbia decided to introduce herself as Isbia Catherial, but then corrected herself, saying it would be more accurate to call herself Isbia Riadon. Canach was a little embarrassed by this, and Aslan, feeling very uncomfortable in the presence of the newlyweds, suggested they board the ship. The Emperor offered Isbia his hand, but she continued to refuse, saying she could walk over herself. A small argument broke out between the newlyweds, and Aslan and the other dockworkers watched it all with embarrassment. So Isbia thought perhaps it was impolite to address the Emperor by his first name in front of those of lower status. Suddenly, Canach announced loudly that Isbia was his wife, so she could address him by his name. Aslan stated that decorum should be maintained in any situation, but the Emperor replied that those words didn't hold much weight coming from someone who addressed him by his first name every chance they got. Isbia was at a loss. The argument had escalated into a conflict. Thinking this, Canach calmed down a bit. He noticed she was in a good mood, but when she almost stumbled, he became worried. Perhaps he was the type of person who only showed his gentle side in private. Then Isbia decided to intervene in the argument between the two men. She said she wasn't feeling well and wanted a rest. Canach immediately seemed to be jolted awake. He said he should have noticed Isbia's discomfort sooner. He quickly approached her, took her in his arms, and said he would take her to her cabin. Aslan looked at the newlyweds in bewilderment. Soon, the Emperor carried his bride to her cabin. He asked her if she was sure it was just discomfort, as her face was flushed and she might have a fever. But she assured him she was fine. Isbia thought it was all absurd, but suddenly she noticed something that distracted her from these thoughts. It was a soft green dress laid out on her bed. She immediately went up to it, saying it was beautiful and that she loved the shade of green. Isbia thought that no one had ever given her such a beautiful gift before. Then she said she wanted to meet the person who had prepared the dress for her. Canach looked away and said, "It was me." She looked at the Emperor in surprise, then thanked him for the wonderful gift and promised to treat it with care. Canach said that Isbia should rest now. He had some matters to attend to, but he promised to return as soon as he was finished. After all, they were husband and wife and should sleep in the same bed. It was then that Isbia realized she hadn't considered this. So from now on, they would sleep in the same bed. She thought that, all in all, it was logical since Canach had married her for an heir, so this was inevitable. However, she felt it was too soon. She thought he would at least wait until they reached the Empire and would first attend to the military matters that couldn't be delayed any longer. Isbia didn't understand why the rush. Was she really that attractive to him? She needed to think this through. The idea that Canach found her attractive didn't make sense. Sooner or later, he would realize that she was barren and couldn't bear him children. Meanwhile, Canach continued to look at her intently, then reached out and lifted her chin. He decided to tell Isbia this because he was worried about her. Sharing a bed didn't mean consummating the marriage. Now she was not only the Empress but also his wife, and sleeping separately could have a negative impact on her. He also assured her that he wouldn't force her. Isbia looked away and said she would do everything to please the Emperor. Then Canach left her, saying he didn't want to force her on their wedding night aboard the ship. Besides, forcing someone who wasn't willing was terrible, so he would wait until Isbia was ready to embrace her wedding night. Isbia was very surprised. She had thought the emperor was indeed in a hurry for an heir. He grinned. It was their wedding night, and his wife was already eager to solidify the empire's position. He was lucky to have such a devoted wife. However, he wasn't in a hurry. If Isbia truly wanted to bear him an heir, then first she needed to at least pretend to love her husband. Canach said that even though it was a political marriage, he hoped genuine love would blossom between them. She looked at her husband in confusion, unsure how to answer him. Soon after, Canach went to his office to attend to some state affairs. He remembered Isbia's words about the heir. Canach realized things were far more complicated than he had imagined, but perhaps it was for the better. It would make things easier for both of them. Since she didn't remember the past, they could start anew. His thoughts were interrupted by Aslan, who burst into his office. Aslan was extremely indignant because he had heard that the emperor, without consulting anyone, had sent their men to protect Akia's borders. Canach said that the people of Akia had lost their guardian and they had to compensate for this loss. Then Aslan said that this political marriage was complete nonsense. Their people are superior in every way. Nothing will stop them from taking over the entire country, and the emperor doesn't even need permission to mine minerals on their territory. He sacrificed the lives of loyal soldiers for a spoiled princess. Canach immediately darkened and ordered Aslan to watch his words. Isbia is not a spoiled princess at all, and for her, Canach is willing to give everything and even more. Aslan wondered why the emperor had suddenly become like this. Then Canach threw the documents at him. He got up from a table and told the man to get out. Meanwhile, something strange happened in Isbia's cabin. The girl woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. She felt unwell. She guessed it was because her guardian power was leaving her. The girl understood that she couldn't let Canach find out that she no longer had any power. Isbia got up and wanted to call a servant for medicine, but her vision blurred and her head was dizzy. The girl somehow made it to the door and, seeing a figure standing behind her, asked him for medicine. This person turned out to be Canach, who immediately asked the girl why she needed medicine. Isbia immediately turned back to the cabin and said that she was fine, just had a headache. However, the man clearly saw that something was wrong. The girl was very pale, so he decided to send for a doctor. Isbia suddenly felt a wave of nausea in her stomach, which was strange because she hadn't eaten anything. After a moment, the girl understood what was happening and looked up at the emperor in horror. There was a large wet stain on his white shirt, right where Isbia's face had just been pressed. Canach said nothing about it. He only asked again for permission to call a doctor. However, the girl did not answer. She was trembling with fear and physical discomfort. She reached out a trembling hand to the man's shirt, apologizing for what she had done. Isbia didn't know what to do. It all started and now she had also stained his clothes. The girl was sure that the emperor was very angry, and now he would definitely reconsider their engagement. Suddenly, Isbia heard the ghost's voice again. She said the girl was making mistake after mistake. She asked what was wrong with her. Was it really so hard to please the emperor? Isbia had already lost her magic, which was the only thing Canach needed, and if she continued to fail, a worse fate awaited her. The heroine apologized again, saying she would clean it up right away, but the emperor told her not to bother. It wasn't her fault. Then he grabbed the edges of his shirt and pulled it up, and the next moment he was already without his outer garment, saying the problem was solved. He said he would just change into a clean shirt as if nothing had happened, and Isbia didn't need to blame herself for such a trifle. The heroine said she didn't want to upset Canach, but he replied that he had nothing to be upset about. He wasn't so arrogant as to judge someone suffering from seasickness. Hearing this, the girl was surprised. Then Canach reached out and put his hand to her forehead, saying that apparently this was her first time on a ship, and he needed to create better conditions. But Isbia shouldn't let such trifles spoil her mood. Then Canach said it reminded him of his days on the battlefield. Every day, he would find himself on a new battlefield, and then he met a man who begged him to be enlisted in the Revolutionary Army. He was a terrible flatterer, constantly saying that he would be loyal to Canach until the last moment of his life. One day, they came across the body of a dead soldier, and the guy's cries echoed throughout the area. Then the emperor asked Isbia who she thought that guy was, but the girl had no idea. It turned out It was Aslan. That day he screamed and cried that he couldn't do it anymore. Isbia couldn't believe it was really Aslan venal. Then Canach continued, saying that Aslan, instead of apologizing, accused him of deliberately walking down the path with the corpses. The heroine was surprised, saying she couldn't believe it. Then she laughed and said she had absolutely no idea he was such a crybaby. Canach looked away and said that a few years later Aslan stopped being so tearful. He added that time had done its work, and after a few more such trips, today's misunderstanding would be erased from Isbia's memory. It was like a drop in the ocean. The girl wondered if he also viewed his terrible past that way, as just a few drops in the ocean of his memories. If so, then she realized how unfair life had been to him, and it pained her. Isbia wanted to get to know the real Canach better, not the cruel and heartless man from the rumors. Just then, a red-haired guy ran up to the girl's cabin and timidly knocked on the door. Canach said he had finally arrived. It turned out that he had sent for a doctor after all. The emperor allowed the young man to enter, telling him to begin immediately. The doctor apologized, explaining he wanted to ensure he had everything required, which caused a slight delay. He said it was an honor to treat Her Majesty. The young man introduced himself as Simon, the court physician. Isbia stared at him in surprise, thinking, could this young, timid boy truly be the Riadon Empire's court physician? Noticing Isbia's focused gaze, Simon asked if she was all right. Isbia immediately offered the doctor a smile and greeting, introducing herself as Princess Isbia of Archaea, the new Empress of Riadon, and thanking him for coming at such a late hour. Simon, slightly flustered, said he was happy to be of service to Her Majesty at any time. Their conversation was interrupted by Canach, his face as dark as a thundercloud. He said that while Simon had been dithering, the princess had been suffering, and he demanded to know what was wrong with her. Isbia asked her husband to calm down, as she was already feeling much better, and there was no need to pressure the doctor so much. But Canach insisted that any oversight could lead to disastrous consequences. The emperor again ordered the doctor to begin the examination, and Simon hurried to Isbia's side. As he examined her, Isbia noticed his trembling. He must have been terrified of Canach. Isbia decided to place her hand on the back of his, asking how old he was. Simon replied that he would be 18 this year. Isbia remarked that he was around the same age as her brother, and to be a court physician so young, he must be incredibly skilled. Although Simon said he still had much to learn, Isbia responded with a smile, saying she didn't believe it. The emperor wouldn't trust someone inexperienced. Grinning, she asked Canach if her assumption was correct. The emperor averted his gaze, saying Simon had quick reflexes and could memorize things with a single glance. He appointed him as court physician, hoping that one day this skill would prove useful, as not everyone could memorize the entire human anatomy at such a young age. Simon said they were too kind. He wasn't that talented, but he promised to do his utmost to heal. Her Majesty. Isbia thanked him, adding that it was good to have such a doctor by their side, knowing their health was not at risk. After Simon finished his examination, Canach and Isbia were left alone. Canach remarked that the doctor was a timid fellow, quite stiff around strangers, but the emperor thought he had still made a good impression. Isbia agreed that was good. Seeing Canach's puzzled expression, she said she knew she needed to get acquainted with the emperor's inner circle, but she didn't understand what the big deal was. Canach then asked if holding Simon's hand counted as getting acquainted. Isbia immediately realized the man was angry, which was to be expected. He must want his wife to maintain a distance from other men. Isbia decided to apologize, saying that Simon reminded her of her brother, and she couldn't ignore his nervousness. But Canach said she needn't apologize. He wasn't going to scold her. Then, smiling, Isbia decided to explain why she had held the doctor's hand. She remembered how the emperor had embraced her in the carriage, showing her how a gentle touch could help in moments of tension. However, she would be more mindful of her actions in the future. Instead of replying, Canach offered Isbia something, placing it on her lips. He said it would help counteract the bitterness of the medicine. Isbia realized it was a candied raspberry, a treat she particularly enjoyed. The emperor said he had plenty more, and Isbia could have as many as she liked. Isbia said she wouldn't be shy, but Canach noticed she hadn't yet swallowed the berry he'd given her. He said she was nibbling at it timidly like a rabbit with a lettuce leaf. However, This closeness left them both feeling somewhat awkward. So Canach stood up, saying Simon's medicine would take effect soon, and in a little while, Isbia would feel better, but it was getting late, and they should go to bed. Canach walked over to his desk, saying he still needed to look over some documents. He had brought all his paperwork here, so he wasn't going anywhere. He couldn't leave her alone until he was sure she was all right. Soon, Isbia went to bed, while the Emperor remained at his desk, continuing to work. Isbia thought to herself that he wasn't joking. He really hadn't left. Despite his usual brusqueness, Canach was concerned about her and her health. She wondered if he truly wanted to cherish her as his wife. If this marriage could bring peace to the people, perhaps Isbia could come to love him too. Suddenly, Dietrich's voice echoed in her mind, saying she shouldn't even dream of such a thing. Fear gripped Isbia, but then she considered it all. Indeed, she couldn't bear Canach an heir, and once he realized that, he would get rid of her. His generosity and kindness could turn to cruelty in an instant, and Isbia decided she shouldn't get too carried away. She was here to protect Akia, and perhaps she should let Canach believe this was all just a game. Soon after, the girl fell asleep, and the Emperor continued with his work. Some time passed, and morning arrived as the ship sailed on towards its destination. When Isbia awoke, she found Canach was not in the room, so she decided to leave the cabin. The maidservant said she shouldn't, and that the Empress was better off resting. However, Isbia assured her that she felt much better after sleeping. This was her first sea voyage, and it would be a shame to spend the entire day sleeping in the cabin. As soon as Isbia opened the cabin door, she was immediately struck by a pleasant coolness, and then she saw the beautiful azure sea, which seemed endless. The view captivated the girl, making it impossible for her to look away. But suddenly, someone called to her from behind, wishing her good morning. These were the Emperor's subjects, and the girl thanked them for their hard work. She noted to herself that Aslan had worn the same expression last night. Every one of them was afraid of her, but that wasn't surprising, as to them, she was just a stranger. Riadon was a young empire. Canach didn't need Akia's magic at all, but rather a wife from the imperial aristocracy who could help gain support and connections. But instead of fulfilling his entourage's expectations, he decided to marry a foreign princess from a crumbling kingdom. Isbia was feared, perhaps even hated, by his subjects. She had never encountered such a thing before, as in Akia, magicians were respected. But now, she didn't even dare to think what the Riadon Empire had in store for her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a shout. Someone called Isbia's name again. Simon ran onto the deck, saying he had been looking for the Empress. Isbia hastened to assure him that she was perfectly fine after last night, and that his medicine had worked wonders. Then the doctor said that the weather was cool today, and if the girl stayed on deck for too long, she might suddenly catch a cold. Canach's voice came from behind Simon. He said the court physician was hardly to blame. The Emperor then took Isbia in his arms, saying she hadn't been in the cabin when he returned, and now it was time to go back. Simon breathed a sigh of relief, realizing the threat from the Emperor had passed. Isbia said that Canach's servants wouldn't appreciate him doing such a thing to her, but the man said that etiquette didn't matter now. The girl persisted, as the Emperor was the main example for the nobles, and carrying a woman in his arms was unseemly. Then Canach leaned closer to her face and said he should have mentioned something earlier. He said he had mentioned earlier that this was why he so desired the throne. He was trying to change everything, and he wanted to build a country where people could feel free, unburdened by etiquette and rank. Canach carried Isbia back to her cabin, saying she shouldn't worry about what those around him thought. His servants had taught him to accept who he truly was, and those who dared to underestimate him had long since departed. Suddenly, the girl noticed several books on her bed. Canach said he had brought the books while she was sleeping, as there was nothing to do in the cabin anyway. Isbia was surprised that there were books here. The Emperor replied that a sea voyage couldn't be without books, and these were taken from the shelves of the palace library. The girl said she loved reading very much, and she always tried to read whenever she had free time, but lately she had been too busy. Then Canach invited her to read together. Isbia thought to herself that Riadon was a remarkable empire. These were very rare books, kept under strict guard. It was said that the palace had the largest library, apparently because of Canach's love of reading. The more the girl learned about him, the more interesting sides she discovered. She had always thought of him as a brave soldier, not someone who would bury his head in books. Bury his head in books. Isbia smiled. Canach looked very cute when he was deep in thought. In her past life, reading was the girl's favorite pastime, as there was no one in the palace to talk to. So she dispelled her loneliness by reading the works of others, which allowed her to immerse herself in the author's thoughts. But now she knew what it was like to have someone nearby with whom she could share her interest in reading. If only life in the Empire could be this peaceful. With these thoughts, Isbia drifted off to sleep. After a while, Canach woke her. He said the ship had arrived at the port, and soon they would be stepping through the palace gates. When Canach and Isbia got into the carriage, the girl suggested that he prepare himself properly in order to make a good impression, as he was returning to the Empire with a princess from overseas. His entourage must be waiting with bated breath. Kavana replied that a public appearance would be arranged in a few days, and then they would see everything. If possible, the emperor wished to introduce Isbia to everyone after the official wedding ceremony in the capital, as what happened in Ark was merely a formality. The girl looked at Kavana in confusion, as it didn't seem that way to her. He then explained that the official ceremony would solidify Isbia's position as empress. When the girl arrived at the imperial palace, Marianne, the head servant, immediately greeted her. She said that her maids had already prepared everything for the empress's comfort. Isbia thanked her for her attentiveness. Marianne then offered to show the girl around the palace. This would help her familiarize herself with the surroundings. During the tour, Isbia thought to herself that the entire palace was a testament to the Empire's wealth and prosperity. No wonder Ark was defeated in her previous life. They had underestimated Kavana and hadn't studied their enemy well enough. Suddenly, Isbia stopped and looked out the window, saying that one of the buildings looked different. Marianne said that the estate was an annex to the imperial palace. Isbia thought to herself that it looked exactly like the royal palace of Ark. She then said that she would visit that building later, as she was more interested in finishing the palace tour first. Marianne said that the entire side wing on the second floor was reserved for the future children of the imperial family. She then led the girl to the empress's chambers. Isbia marveled at the splendor and spaciousness of her future bedroom. She thought the room was too extravagant for her. She then walked over to the bed and touched the beautiful red sheets. Marianne said that she would go and check with the servants to make sure everything was ready for tonight. Isbia looked at the woman in confusion. Marianne explained that His Majesty and Madame would be spending their first night in the imperial palace tonight. Later that day, Kavana arrived at the bedchamber. He said that the room had changed while he was attending to his duties. Isbia explained that all the servants, including Marianne, had been trying to make tonight memorable. Now the emperor understood why his wife was currently wearing a nightgown. The girl was a little embarrassed, feeling that the dark blue nightgown was a bit much. Kavana awkwardly looked away, saying that the garment suited her very well. He then added that he had promised he wouldn't initiate anything until she was ready. But there was no doubt that Isbia looked beautiful. Deciding not to continue the topic, he suggested that the girl lie down, as she must be tired. Isbia then decided to apologize, as she wasn't very knowledgeable about these matters. Kavana turned to her and said that he wasn't an expert himself, and he had never been intimate with anyone. Isbia was surprised, as he was an emperor, and rulers should be concerned with producing heirs. Kavana sat on the edge of the bed and asked if the girl wanted a more experienced man. The girl, embarrassed by such a question, said that she didn't mean it that way. She was just a little surprised. However, the emperor said that the problem wouldn't go away on its own, and neither of them knew what to do. He then suggested they practice. He had heard that they needed to hold hands first, lie down next to each other, and then see how things went. Isbia gave him her hand, but she was at a loss for what to do. She then said that she needed a moment and that she felt a little uncomfortable in the nightgown. The girl went to the other side of the room to change, but Kavana said the buttons on the nightgown were at the back. The man slowly approached her and offered to help her take it off. He gently touched her back and asked Isbia if she minded. After a moment, he unbuttoned all the buttons on the girl's back. Kavana then brushed her hair, gathering it onto Isbia's shoulders. The girl shyly thanked him for his help. Soon, Isbia was lying in bed, covered with a blanket. All of this made her very shy. Kavana was also lost in thought. He had never imagined that he would be doing things like undoing buttons in place of a maid. So he decided to reach out to Isbia, inviting her practice again, but she was so far away that he couldn't even hold her hand. Then the girl reached out and their palms met. She asked if he was comfortable now, as they suddenly found themselves sharing a bed, whereas before they had slept in separate cabins. Then, To Isbia's surprise, the emperor replied that he had been sharing a cabin with her throughout the journey. While she slept, he spent the night in a nearby chair. At some point, he only returned to his own cabin when he needed a shower and change. Then he suddenly heard Isbia talking in her sleep. She often called out for her brother, saying that she didn't want to do this. Kavana realized she was having nightmares every night, and he had promised the girl that he would stay with her until she fell asleep. Isbia smiled and said the emperor was indeed quite different from what she had imagined. She admitted that before the wedding, she was a little afraid of him, thinking Kavana was a dangerous person because he became emperor through a revolution he orchestrated himself. But now she realized that wasn't the case. Isbia was just afraid that the emperor wouldn't like her. Then Kavana put his hand on her cheek and said he liked the girl very much, and he didn't regret anything, including the wedding, whether now or in the future. Isbia was the person he needed most. The girl said she liked him too, and soon she began to fall asleep. Before falling asleep, Isbia heard the ghost's voice again, telling her she shouldn't be moved by this. After all, Kavana had said what he needed was her power and their future children. He liked Isbia the witch, not her. In the morning, the girl woke up and saw a bouquet of red roses on the table. She noticed they weren't there yesterday. The maids must have prepared them. Just then, Mariana called for Isbia. She was glad to hear that the empress had slept soundly through the night without nightmares. Looking at the maid, Isbia thought that her speech and mannerisms were very proper, her movements confident, and her posture dignified. However, she also treated her with more care than necessary. But the girl didn't have time to think and worry about this. Now she had a lot to do in the empire. Then she asked Mariana to prepare a simple breakfast for her. She wanted to go to the Imperial Palace Library. Mariana accompanied the girl to the library. As soon as Isbia entered, she was struck by its beauty. It housed some books that hadn't even been officially published. The librarian said there were also collections of legends and stories here, previously passed down only by word of mouth. All the books about magic were kept in a secret area of the library, but Isbia could visit any time. So the girl decided to go there now. As she walked in, she thought that perhaps the key to the Guardian's power could be found here. Suddenly, among the bookshelves, she noticed a green book that immediately caught her attention. Isbia immediately picked up the book and sat down at the table. The heyday of magic was hundreds of years ago, so she expected that finding relevant information wouldn't be so easy. But she never expected to stumble upon this book right away. The title was The Rise of Magic in the Northern Continent, a history of non-human races. It seemed there were rumors that certain races still used magic, which was why there was more information about guardians than about ordinary mages. Over 300 years ago, an evil army invaded the lands inhabited by humans. They even threatened the forest god and his silver forest. Then, a man from the casserole family heard the forest call and came to the rescue. She vowed to protect the silver forest until the end of time. Her dedication and courage pleased the goddess Farka, who bestowed divine power upon the casserole family. However, a fragile human body couldn't withstand the power of the gods, so the guardian of the silver forest would never be able to live the life of an ordinary person. Isbia already knew all this information, but there was one exception: a person completely devoted to serving the goddess and protecting the silver forest, the eternal friend of the forest elves, Janisa Casserole. She transcended human limitations, and her child was blessed by the wood elves hidden deep underground. Even after hundreds of years, the wood elves still existed. Lady Janisa, Isbia thought. History books only recorded that she was a guardian who awakened 300 years ago. But how did Janisa have a child? The girl also didn't understand why she was called the eternal friend of the forest elves. She thought if she could meet the forest elves, she might learn more, but she didn't know where to find them. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Someone was calling her. It was Kavana. He asked Isbia why she was still here. The emperor had decided to take a walk in the garden with his wife, but he wasn't happy that she wasn't eating on time. The ladies of the palace were very uneasy about this, as the empress was nowhere to be seen from morning till night, not showing her face to anyone. Then the girl decided to apologize for this. She said that while reading, she hadn't noticed how quickly time had passed. Kavana's cheeks immediately flushed, and he told the girl not to look at him like that. Then he said he wasn't angry, but his words sounded harsh, so he decided to apologize. He wasn't angry that Isbia was spending time in the library. He was just worried that she was forgetting to take care of her health while she was so weak. In fact, he had expected something like this to happen at least once. She loved reading so much, he should have taken that into account. The two were standing too close. Then Kavana moved away from the girl and walked forward. Isbia turned around in confusion and watched as the man opened the tall wrought iron gates and invited the girl inside. Beyond the gate lay a beautiful place with a large fountain and picturesque shrubs. Kavana said he thought he should show Isbia this spot as a testament to the sincerity of his concern. The girl touched the flowers, noting how lovely they were. She was very fond of flowers, especially those with small buds, which came in a variety of colors. Kavana said he was glad she liked the place. However, when she came out like this to admire the things she enjoyed, she needed to remember to bring food. The emperor ordered more flowers to be planted around the special palace prepared for Isbia. The girl thought it would be wonderful to take a walk there someday, noting that she had never seen this palace before. Could it be that Kavana had decided to build this place for her, just like this greenhouse? Isbia hoped she wasn't mistaken, but why did he continue to show such gentle concern for her? Then she touched a flower and again felt a strange sensation. Somehow, here she felt a tremor of her own magic. Kavana asked if she was all right, and the girl shrugged, saying everything was fine, but her gaze was drawn to the flower. She thought she couldn't use magic after leaving Arcadia, so she could use her ability to communicate with plants. While Kavana wasn't looking, she decided she could chat with the plants for a bit. As soon as Isbia touched the flower, a voice told her she shouldn't be here, that she needed to escape this place as soon as possible. The girl began to frantically look around, not understanding what was happening. Kavana looked at her in surprise, asking what was wrong. The voice continued to ring in Isbia's mind, saying that if she didn't flee this place now, she would die. One fine day, a week before this incident, a man and a woman met in the greenhouse. The woman stated that no matter how much the man pleaded with her, her answer remained the same. The man chuckled. He said she could at least be a little more agreeable. Then the woman shrieked, saying she had always been proud of her profession. The man chuckled, saying pride was a good word, but was her job more important than her own sister? The woman nervously clutched her skirt, not understanding how the man knew about her sister. He then told her to weigh her options carefully and consider. Because fulfilling his request wasn't that difficult, the woman only needed to report everything the Empress did and said, especially since she would still be working in the Empress's court. Since the woman had ultimately returned, it meant she was still interested in his proposal. It turned out the woman was Mariana, the head servant of the Imperial Palace. Soon, night fell over the empire. Mariana walked towards one of the houses. Inside, there was a bed, and on the bed lay a girl. Mariana apologized, saying she promised to visit her more often, but there was so much to do at the palace. But first, she suggested the girl, whose name was Edith, take some medicine. She was her sister, suffering from sclerosis. The man knew about this. It was unbelievable that Mariana's only sister was afflicted with such a disgusting and incurable disease, meaning she didn't have to bother hiding it from him anymore. The man himself knew very well what this disease was. It was a curse unique to their fortress-like, isolated empire. If one didn't continuously take potions imbued with magical power, their entire body would petrify, and then they would die. In a world where wizards were hard to find, the price of such medicine had skyrocketed. The man said that such an incurable disease was sure to cause a lot of trouble. By cooperating with them, Mariana would have access to a large sum of money, more than she could imagine. Mariana asked, besides yourself, who else do I have to cooperate with? The man said he could only tell her that after she firmly accepted his proposal, so he told her to think it over carefully. Mariana didn't understand why he was asking her to do these things, and most importantly, why he needed this. Meanwhile, Aslan, as requested by Kavana, brought him the tax calculations for the first quarter of the western part of the empire. He also proposed some tax reform suggestions so that the emperor could familiarize himself with the plans. Kavana said that at this rate, the reform plan would be ready for the next parliamentary session. Aslan pointed out that the discussions at this session would be much more serious. The conservative nobles wouldn't allow tax reform to take place. They would advocate for maintaining the old ways. If they vetoed the reform plan, they would also disrupt the document verification process. They still believed that the nobles should rule the people. They still clung to their old beliefs. Kavana pointed out that they still allowed someone like him to ascend to the throne, though it wasn't permission but surrender, as they had to shamefully yield, so they could betray him at any time. They must never forget how firm their true stance was. That being said, If their methods prove useless in supporting the Empire, they will meet the same fate as the previous emperor, beheaded by Kavana's sword. Aslan said the emperor would never do such a thing, as he was incredibly powerful. Kavana replied that he simply didn't want to see any more bloodshed, at least not within the Empire. Then he remembered Isbia saying she liked that man, and now Kavana wondered if she would still say that and consider him a hero if she knew everything he had gone through. Meanwhile, Isbia was in the greenhouse. She wanted to see Mariana there and waited for her to arrive shortly. Soon, the maid appeared at the appointed place. Isbia then said she wanted to ask her something. She suggested they take a walk, as standing and talking would take too long. As they strolled, Isbia said she was astonished the first time she saw the greenhouse. She was truly surprised, never expecting that despite her lost powers, she could still communicate with the plants. Far from home, the image of the flower telling her that night that she would die if she didn't leave this place flashed through her mind again. Recalling that time, Kavana immediately became nervous, not understanding what was happening, but Isbia simply replied that she had just made a small mistake. However, now, she was haunted by the thought, would she really die if she didn't leave this place? Then the voice told her that the woman close to her was dangerous. She often met with strange people and discussed harming Isbia with one of them. Isbia couldn't believe it. Could it really be referring to Mariana? So she asked the plant to show her its memories so she could know what the maid, Mariana, and that person had talked about. The plant said Isbia could freely view their memories as they were on her side. All the events that had occurred in the greenhouse flashed before Isbia's eyes. She saw Mariana interacting with a stranger, heard their conversation, and now everything was clear. Now, in the greenhouse with Mariana, Isbia decided to ask her if she liked the flowers. Mariana replied that they were beautiful, so she supposed she did. They are truly beautiful creatures, but it's terrifying how easily they are lost, Mariana said, adding that she loved her little sister more than any flower. Her sister was 10 years younger than Mariana. Their parents had died early, so Mariana had raised her sister on her own. Ever since Mariana became the Empress's maid, her sister had been living alone outside the palace. Mariana said her sister could have also become a maid and lived here, but her health was very poor. She had long suffered from petrification sickness, and Mariana had been struggling to get medicine for her. Suddenly, Mariana realized she had said too much and immediately apologized to Isbia for it. But Isbia said it was all right. She was the one who initiated the conversation, so Mariana had nothing to apologize for. They saw each other every day, but Isbia hadn't even tried to get to know her better. Isbia said that from now on, Mariana would be her closest friend, which was why she had initiated the conversation. She wanted to try to improve their relationship, even if it might be too late. Isbia believed that Mariana was so distant from her simply because, in her eyes, she was a strange stranger who suddenly became her master. But by trying to build a relationship with her and talking a little, they could become close friends. If Isbia had tried to do this from the beginning, Mariana wouldn't have been so distant. Isbia vowed she wouldn't live like she had before, but that bad habit of running away without trying to understand others better still lingered. Now Isbia had to change that. She was no longer the princess who died like a pathetic pawn in the game of powerful figures. She had become an empress, ruling over many people. Then Isbia said Mariana needn't worry. She would try to find a solution. Despite Mariana saying that Her Majesty needn't bother with such a trivial matter, Isbia said that Mariana was her person. Isbia firmly decided that she wouldn't run away anymore. She had to do everything she could. A while later, Isbia arrived at the emperor's office, where Aslan was also present. Isbia said she had something to ask of Kavana. Before doing so, she made sure she wasn't interrupting anything important. Aslan started to say they were discussing the reforms, but Kavana immediately interrupted him, saying he was completely free and was just about to visit his wife. Isbia then asked the emperor if he would like to have dinner together today. Faced with such an unexpected proposal, Kavana blushed but immediately agreed. A whole table of food was laid out for the couple. Isbia asked her husband if he was surprised by her sudden invitation to dinner. It was such an unexpected move that she thought Kavana would refuse. However, he said he was pleasantly surprised by such an offer. Isbia's cheeks immediately flushed, and she said her request must have caused a lot of trouble for the palace chefs. Apparently, they hadn't realized it was just the two of them and had prepared a whole table full of food. Kavana asked her why she was so worried, as everything was as usual. The girl was embarrassed, realizing she had dinner in the study almost every day. Kavana sighed, not knowing what to do with his empress. After a while, he said it was nice that they were having dinner together. Otherwise, he would never have known Isbia ate so little. The girl thought to herself that she still had so much to learn, but Kavana interrupted her thoughts, suggesting they have dinner together from now on. The girl wanted to object, saying the emperor already had a lot to do, but he said he was worried about her health and prolonged weakness. Then he handed her a piece of raspberry pie, as the girl loved raspberries. As Isbia began to eat the pie, Kavana decided to ask what was the matter. He understood that she wasn't just asking for his time while he was busy. He felt the girl wanted to tell him something. Then Isbia said she had heard something from her maid. Mariana was in a difficult situation. Kavana knew her, as he had personally brought Mariana into the palace. She had studied for a long time to become an exemplary servant and was known for her manners and tidiness, so the emperor immediately appointed her as a maid in the palace. She would periodically leave the palace, so Kavana suspected she had run into some trouble, although he didn't know what exactly. Petrification sickness is a terrible disease, and in this case, it was clearly difficult for her to concentrate on her work. Then Isbia asked if Mariana's sister could be placed in the palace. It would be better if her sister were closer to her, and it would be easier for her to take care of her. Kavana considered it. The court physician was preparing to study petrification sickness in more detail. Moreover, the conditions and equipment in the palace were better than in other hospitals. And since Isbia's palace was nearby, Mariana wouldn't have to travel far to visit her sister. Isbia couldn't believe her ears. Would the emperor really allow it? He grinned and said that in this empire, nothing was impossible if the empress requested it. The girl looked at him in surprise. She hadn't even thought Kavana would be so accommodating. Noticing the girl's gaze, he asked if everything was all right. Isbia smiled and thanked him for his help. If it weren't for him, the fate of Mariana and her sister would be unknown. Kavana said he had simply fulfilled her request. In fact, Isbia should be thanked, not him. The girl was embarrassed. She insisted that it was all thanks to Kavana's generosity, but they should agree that they were both wonderful. He grinned, agreeing with this statement. Isbia thought that when the emperor held her hand, she was very nervous. She needed to finish eating quickly and leave the table. Suddenly, Kavana said she had something on her face. He reached out to her cheek and removed a small piece of raspberry pie. The girl thanked him for his help, but suddenly found herself unable to take her eyes off him. Kavana leaned closer to Isbia, gazing into her eyes, each moment closer to her lips. A spark flashed between the couple, but it was destined to be extinguished immediately as Aslan burst into the room. He said he had brought the documents the emperor had mentioned. Kavana immediately pulled away from Isbia and turned away, his face flushed. Aslan immediately realized he had come at the wrong time. When the emperor calmed down a bit, he asked what documents they were. Isbia thought to herself that if she wasn't mistaken, Kavana had just wanted to kiss her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the emperor's voice, saying they had had a pleasant time, but now it was time to say goodbye for a while. Although the girl didn't show it, she wondered what she should do. Lately, she had been feeling strange whenever she was around Kavana. Soon, Isbia called Mariana to tell her the good news. Her sister would be able to receive treatment at the palace hospital. Isbia had already discussed it with His Majesty, and a bed was being prepared at the hospital. Soon Mariana would be able to bring her sister over. The maid said that, according to the rules, only nobles and officials were allowed access to all institutions within the palace, and they were just commoners. Isbia didn't understand why she was saying this, and then Mariana explained that she came from an ordinary family. His Majesty gave her the opportunity to work in the imperial palace. She was incredibly fortunate, because in other countries, commoners like her weren't even allowed to touch the empress's skirts. Then Isbia said that this was the Riadon Empire, where people were judged by their abilities, not their origins. Therefore, Mariana deserved to be treated this way. Moreover, how could an empress be considered good if she couldn't help those close to her due to some rigid rules? Isbia said this was her wish. She had decided to no longer ignore Mariana's difficulties and hoped she would accept. The maid didn't know what to say. It all seemed too extraordinary. She remembered the days spent by Edith's bedside, seeing no improvement in her condition. Tears streamed down Mariana's face as she confessed how badly she had treated the empress. Kneeling, she decided to reveal that some people had tried to enlist her in a plot against Isbia. They promised to give her medicine for petrification sickness if she provided them with information about the Empress. The maid begged for punishment, confessing that she had considered agreeing for a moment. Isbia helped her up, saying she only wanted to help her sister. On the contrary, the fact that she hadn't agreed, even under those circumstances, was even more commendable. Isbia helped the maid to her feet and asked her to tell her who had made the offer. Wiping her tears, Mariana said it was a prominent and respected nobleman of the empire, Baron Edwin. Isbia said she had never heard the name before and wondered why he wanted information about her. Mariana didn't know the answer to that question, but she said he was a very cunning man who had been disrespectful to the previous emperor. He had gone into hiding, fearing retribution. He had supported the revolution to change his situation and escape his predicament, even being called one of the co-founders of the empire. Isbia understood that this man hadn't agreed with the ideals of the revolution itself, but had supported it for his own benefit. Even Baron Oslinvernal, who had contributed far more to the revolution, had refused a title, while other revolutionaries like Baron Edwin hadn't received high titles. The emperor had only granted him a large plot of land. Baron Edwin had lost even that, so he now held a minor position in the imperial palace. Isbia thought that, first of all, during the revolution, the upper class was supposed to lose their privileged positions, which was why those who had previously belonged to the upper class now felt excluded. However, she wondered why he was keeping tabs on her now that the political situation was calm. Then Mariana urged her to be careful, as Baron Edwin always mentioned accomplices, meaning more than one or two people were involved. Isbia then asked Mariana if she knew where the estate Baron Edwin had received as a reward was located. The maid replied that it was on the northeastern border of the empire. It was near the border settlements and bordered the kingdom of Ark. Isbia thought to herself, so he owned land on the border with Ark. A name immediately came to mind, someone who might be connected to Baron Edwin's actions. She immediately remembered the communication Crystal Dietrich had given her before she left. Now Isbia understood. Only one person would be interested in any movements within the empire. Her brother didn't trust her and was trying to monitor her through other people. Noticing the Empress's somber expression, Mariana asked if everything was all right. Isbia gave a troubled smile, thanking the maid for telling her everything. Then Mariana asked for permission to contact Baron Edwin again. She knew Isbia wouldn't ignore his actions, but if they exposed him now, they would never know who else was behind it. However, it was dangerous for the Empress to do anything at the moment, so Mariana offered to become a double agent. She would pretend to accept the Baron's proposal to gain his trust, but would remain loyal to the Empress. Isbia hesitated, worried that Mariana might suffer because of it, but the girl assured her it was nothing, as the Empress had saved her sister's life, and now she was ready to give her own life for her mistress. Mariana knelt, begging permission to do so. Although Isbia didn't like any of this, seeing the firm resolve on the maid's face, she agreed. She thanked Mariana for everything she had done for her. In the evening, Isbia decided to take a walk in the garden. She walked over to a flower bed and sat down. The image of Mariana saying she would give her life for her flashed through her mind. Just then, someone approached Isbia from behind. It was Kavana. He asked what she was thinking about. Isbia said that everywhere she went here, there were only beautiful flowers throughout the empire. Usually, flowers didn't bloom for so long, but the gardeners took such good care of them. Now that she mentioned it, Kavana noticed it too. Then, Isbia said she told Mariana that the emperor allowed her to bring her sister to the imperial palace, and she was very happy about it. Now she could help her sister. As she finished speaking, the maid tightly gripped her hand, squeezing with all her might, no matter how strange it seemed. She said she wanted to be on her side, but Isbia hadn't done anything for her and wasn't sure if she deserved the kind of trust. The Empress immediately apologized, saying she was overthinking and shouldn't have said that. Then Kavana said he walked this path almost every day to and from his office. But today he noticed these flowers for the first time, and if it weren't for Isbia, he might never have known how much effort the gardeners put into them. The same was true for Mariana. Kavana only suspected her situation, but he wouldn't even think to ask. Caring for others and looking after them was also a kind of work, and Kavana was glad that such a girl had become his empress. She was capable of taking responsibility for the empire. The man thanked Isbia for becoming the empress of this empire. Then he bent down and gently kissed her hand. Although Isbia was happy every time Kavana treated her like this, she remembered that she was hiding the secret of the Guardian and the agreement with her brother from him. As long as she concealed these two facts, she could never truly become the empress, but she wanted to at least try, even if this relationship wasn't real. Just as Kavana said, Isbia had to become someone capable of ruling the empire. When the girl was alone, she picked up the communication crystal and almost immediately heard Dietrich's voice. She softly said they hadn't been in touch for a long time. Dietrich said he was starting to worry she was dead since she hadn't contacted him for so long, but it seemed to him that she was still trying to please the emperor. Then he asked how she was doing in the empire. Isbia replied that everything wasn't as bad as he thought. The empress thought to herself that Mariana was now playing the role of a double agent, which would allow her to quickly gain intelligence on those who were truly against her. Isbia needed to find out if her brother was behind all of this, so she needed to be as friendly to him as possible. That's why she said the emperor was surprisingly easy to arouse suspicion in, so she hadn't been able to gain his trust yet. Dietrich said he heard Kavana was taking good care of his sister. Isbia rose from her chair and asked what he meant. Dietrich grinned, saying he wouldn't send his only sister to someone else's empire alone from the very beginning. He sent his spy to the imperial palace to watch over her. Then Isbia thought that perhaps her brother was the one behind Baron Edwin. She said it put her mind at ease, but decided to ask who this spy was since she could trust someone who was already by her side. However, Dietrich said she didn't need to know, she just needed to do as he said. After all, a girl like Isbia would only be disappointed if she started interfering in politics. But if she really wanted to help, then Dietrich had information that the empire's discussions about the new tax reform hadn't subsided. The reform plan was very radical, and surprisingly, the conservative nobles reacted calmly to it. Then Dietrich asked his sister what methods the emperor used to get them on his side. If they wanted to destroy the empire, they needed to understand the current relationship. The relationship between the emperor and the nobles. Isbia said many conservative nobles were the backbone of the revolutionary movement. However, Dietrich said she was getting ahead of herself. If she really cared, instead of worrying about this, she should find Kavana's weaknesses instead of whispering sweet nothings to him in bed. But in any case, he hoped Isbia was still on the kingdom of Ark's side. The man asked his sister to contact him more often. Then he said goodbye to Isbia, calling her his beloved sister. As soon as the connection was broken, Dietrich jumped up from his chair and cursed loudly. He knew Isbia was pretending she didn't know anything. Her words about worrying about the fate of Ark were all lies. She just didn't want to lose the world that made her the empress, which meant this humiliating marriage suited her perfectly. Dietrich was furious. If Isbia really cared about their country, then she had to fight to the end. They both once prayed for the decline of their country. Dietrich thought to himself that Isbia would never know what he did to protect the country when he became regent for his sickly father, who had lost both his mother and control of the kingdom. He was only 14 at the time, and none of the nobles were willing to sincerely obey the young prince who had replaced the ailing king. Seeing his sister's tears every day, Dietrich realized that even if he had to dedicate his entire life to it, he would protect his family and his country. He made this decision and accepted that he would have to part with his sister after a while. He happened to learn that Isbia had awakened as the Guardian, and everyone said it was proof that Ark was still blessed by the Silver Forest. However, the problem was that the first prince, Dietrich, was not the Guardian. The nobles believed that Isbia, not the crown prince, should inherit the throne, as it was the will of heaven. He remembered the day his sister woke up. The moment she pushed him away after waking up, Isbia said she hadn't fully recovered and hoped her brother would understand. Dietrich said it would indeed take a long time to return to normal. And now, 10 years later, Dietrich believed Isbia wouldn't betray him. She had become the Guardian, yet she still hadn't done anything for Ark. All her meager attempts to use her magical powers only isolated Ark. These fools didn't even notice this, and they still championed her as the true heir to the throne. The whole thing was utterly hideous. Just then, a man in a hooded black cloak walked into Dietrich's office. He said his time would soon come, and someone would personally take the tyrannical king's head. Then, Dietrich would become the ruler of the entire continent. The man agreed. He wouldn't have to wait long. Ark needed to be rebuilt from the ground up to prosper. Even if Dietrich hadn't become the Guardian, he could still make Ark the leading nation on the continent. He was determined to prove this, no matter the cost. The next day, Isbia told Mariana that she wanted to meet with the members of parliament. She wanted to know how power was distributed in the empire. The maid said there were only 20 people in parliament, 10 nobles and 10 commoners. To pass a new law, 13 or more people had to agree. Isbia thought that with a 50-50 ratio of nobles and commoners in parliament, political struggles were inevitable, even during the legislative process. Therefore, the members of parliament knew more about the empire's situation than anyone else. Dietrich already knew about the preparations for the tax reform, and Baron Edwin was just a minor official. It shouldn't be easy for him to obtain information about reforms that hadn't yet been passed. This meant that a certain noble in parliament was in contact with Dietrich. Isbia then said she wanted to meet some of the nobles in parliament. She wondered if this would be seen as a conspicuous political gesture. Mariana said that ladies from some noble families attended parliament meetings, and they would hold tea parties afterward. If Isbia hosted a tea party and invited the noble ladies, it would be like an ordinary social gathering. The Empress realized that she could also learn some useful information through these ladies. She thanked Mariana for the good idea. The maid said everything for the tea party would be ready in a few days. She asked where the Empress wanted to hold it. Isbia said she didn't know, but since it was a tea party, it had to be somewhere very beautiful. Soon, the noble ladies arrived at the Empress's palace. Mariana said she was waiting for them inside. The ladies noted that the place was very beautiful. There were many rumors about the princess from a small kingdom, saying it was an arranged marriage, but they hadn't expected the emperor to care so much for his wife. At that moment, Isbia was watching the guests from the balcony. She smiled at them, inviting them to celebrate their first meeting. On the occasion of the parliament meeting, ladies from the noblest families gathered, including the most prestigious duchess, Evelyn Haley, a young, red-haired girl. She remarked that thanks to the emperor's care, Isbia must be quite comfortable in her palace. The empress knew of the Haley duchy. This family was on the emperor's side, and many empresses during the Pernan dynasty had come from this family. But as soon as the revolution broke out, this family was the first among the noble families to side with Kavana. All the noble ladies gathered here were from wise families that had survived the revolutionary storm. The impression they formed of Isbia, the empress, would greatly influence her future political activities. However, a green-haired girl at the table made her uneasy. According to Mariana, that lady was Aslan's sister, Marchioness Limbella Brooks. No wonder the empress thought she looked familiar. Isbia then approached her and asked if she liked the aroma of their tea. Limbella became flustered, stammering that it was the first time she had seen such tea leaves. Their family also grew tea. Another girl grinned and said that the Marchioness was the same as always in front of the Empress. Evelyn apologized for Limbella's rudeness, as she was very shy. She might have looked clumsy. Limbella sadly lowered her gaze as the other ladies began to whisper amongst themselves. They said everyone knew that the Brooks Marquisate was located in the frigid north, where nothing but hardy trees could grow, and tea had never been grown. The ladies then turned to Isbia, mentioning they had heard her homeland was quite cold as well. Evelyn stated that the northern part of the empire was frigid and the harvests were poor, so it must be difficult for families like the Brooks family to live there. She asked Her Majesty how her homeland was, presuming it was quite different from the empire's north. Isbia understood this was all a test. They had deliberately put Limbella, who came from a young noble family, in a difficult position to see which side the empress would take. Some of their families had ties to Dietrich. Isbia knew what she needed to do to implement her plans, but was it the right thing to do? As much as she wanted to use her powers now, she really couldn't. Isbia then recalled the night in the greenhouse, when Kavana kissed her hand and she promised herself to work hard to accumulate power. Isbia stated that the north had a harsh, cold climate year-round. Evelyn then asked if it mattered whether people lived in the north or the south. Isbia smiled and said she was glad the ladies were interested in the northern lands and thus showed concern for them. They understood how difficult life was for northern families. In winter, that meant they understood very well how to manage their own territories. Evelyn's face immediately fell, and she asked Isbia what she meant. Was she truly asking if they were capable of governing their own territories? Isbia answered in the affirmative, as they had just experienced a rather harsh winter, and she was eager to hear how the ladies had coped. One of the ladies said that, unlike the north, winters in the south of the empire were not so harsh because they were blessed by the goddess. Isbia said that as far as she knew, there had been little rain last autumn, and it was said that the empire had experienced a grain shortage as a result. Records showed that the imperial granaries had distributed grain for this reason. Even with the goddess's blessing, winter was still a difficult season for the people. People faced cold and hunger not only in the north, but also in the south. This meant they too had to know how to cope with even the most brutal and sorrowful circumstances. Isbia then asked if they could now answer her question, but the ladies remained silent. So she turned to Limbella and asked her to talk about how her family had weathered the winter. Limbella was quite embarrassed when the Empress turned to her, but she decided to answer the question. She was ashamed to admit it, but the winters were indeed harsh where they lived. Therefore, His Majesty would allocate grain to them every year as support. Every year, they would gradually stockpile supplies to distribute during particularly difficult times. The farmers would gather firewood and deliver it to the Marquisate, so that the farmers who couldn't work in the winter could still receive their daily wages, and they had money to buy food fairly and maintain their dignity. Isbia said it was good that they were able to find work for the farmers under such conditions. Thanks to the Marquis and Marchioness Brooks, the people who rented land from them were able to spend a rather warm and comfortable winter, unlike those less fortunate. Evelyn jumped up from her seat and asked what answer the Empress expected from them. She said she simply wanted to ask how they spent their winters. Isbia then said that before their visit, she had reviewed all the Empire's annual financial reports. Last winter, Duke Haley and Count Goto spent a fortune buying expensive iron ore from abroad, and records showed that this ore was imported into the Empire. The Brooks family spent their money buying food and clothing for the farmers. But what exactly did they do with the ore that required so much iron? Evelyn then screamed, saying she couldn't believe the Empress was accusing her family of plotting rebellion. Countess Goto joined the conversation and said that they had indeed purchased iron ore, but Her Majesty had misunderstood. They wanted to purchase the royal mine that was about to be auctioned. Isbia then realized they wanted to buy the mine. The nobles agreed to the tax reform on the condition that the royal mine be auctioned. That was why the conservative nobles acquiesced. Evelyn then screamed, saying they too were contributing to the founding of this empire. She had dedicated her life to the well-being of this country, but all she received in return was cold disdain, so she couldn't just let it go. Evelyn then requested a leave. A week had passed since the tea party. During this time, Isbia hadn't received a letter from any of the ladies, obviously because she had left a bad impression on them. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Baron Oslin, who had something to report to the Empress. Oslin said his sister had asked him to deliver a letter and a small pouch to Isbia, and that he had also heard of Her Majesty's concern for his sister. He explained that Limbella had suffered a serious illness at the age of 10, after which she developed a stutter, and so she had rarely left their estate for all these years. That day was her first time visiting the palace, and the first thing she did was ask Oslin to deliver the letter to the Empress. The pouch contained tea leaves found only in the Brooks Marquisate. The tea leaves appeared small, but thanks to their incredible hardiness, they could continue to grow even in the snow, which gave them a unique aroma. This tea was extremely precious, so even Oslin rarely received such a gift. Clearly, Limbella greatly desired to repay Isbia's kindness. Perhaps she would become an even more capable servant, as she was a clever girl and knew far more than her brother Oslin. The man decided to express his gratitude to Isbia for her kindness towards him and his sister, which he would never forget. Isbia, holding his hand, said that Baron Oslin was a responsible man who could be entrusted with the affairs of the empire. The girl thought to herself that Kavana was right. Even without magic, she could help others. She told Oslin that his sister's gift was truly precious. A little later, Isbia decided to have tea with Kavana. She said that her meeting with the noble women had been a success, and she had managed to befriend Marchioness Limbella Brooks and her brother Oslin, who was very kind to her. The emperor asked why the girl addressed him by his first name, as she had always used his last name before. Then Isbia said that Oslin claimed he was just an ordinary vassal, and that the empress should address him by his name and not his title. Isbia laughed, thinking that Aslan didn't seem to like her. Kavana noticed that she looked very happy. The girl said her joy was beyond words. Kavana hoped that she would get along with his vassals, and she had succeeded. However, the man said that sometimes she did worry him. Isbia didn't understand what he was talking about, but the man said it didn't matter. He asked the girl to tell him if he was taking up too much of her time. Before Isbia could answer, he asked if the girl was coming today. The protagonist said that Mariana's sister, Edith, was indeed coming today. Meanwhile, the girl had already arrived at the palace gates. Isbia and Mariana came out to greet her. As soon as the girl saw the empress, she immediately curtsied. Then she raised her head, saw her sister, and immediately rushed to hug her. Mariana reported that thanks to Her Majesty's medicine, Edith was much better. Isbia said that was good news, meaning she would recover soon. But in the meantime, the court physician would look after her. The protagonist extended her hand to the girl, her heart breaking at the thought of all the suffering she must have endured. Edith took the empress's hand. At that moment, Isbia felt a strange sensation. She couldn't understand what was happening, and her face contorted in fear. Simon snapped her out of it. He ran to the palace gates, apologizing for being late again. Isbia said everything was fine. They had just arrived themselves, thinking that the strange feeling was just a bout of dizziness. Then she introduced Mariana's sister, Edith, to Simon. The young doctor looked at the girl in confusion, then timidly greeted her. After that, he quickly turned around and said they should go see the hospital. Isbia smiled awkwardly. She had thought they would quickly become friends because of their similar age, but it seemed it would take some time. Simon said the court hospital was for the royal family and their attendants, so there weren't many rooms here. They concentrated all possible resources here to research pathologies and medicines. They were studying multiple sclerosis in this room. They hadn't had time to clean up, so Simon apologized for the mess. Isbia said it was clear their doctors weren't idle, and she was proud of them. She picked up some documents, and Simon said these were research materials. The Kavana Trading Guild was the sole producer and distributor of the medicine for sclerosis, and they almost completely controlled the price. The Empire's doctors were trying to create their own formula to counter them. However, when they studied the components of the medicine, they discovered unexpected ingredients, most likely involving magic. Therefore, since none of them understood magic, the research had reached a dead end. They were currently planning to develop a treatment method that didn't rely on magic. At that moment, Isbia expressed her desire to help. She said she and Simon would make excellent accomplices in this matter. The moment Isbia touched his hand, he screamed, scattering the papers he was holding. He knew the Emperor would be angry again, and he didn't want that at all. That evening, when Isbia and Kavana were alone, she told him about her plans to work with Simon on a cure. The girl understood that her magic had significantly weakened after leaving Arcadia, but developing medicine shouldn't require much power. This was an ideal opportunity to solidify her position as Empress. Isbia wanted to help by doing what she was good at, and she believed Kavana would support her. Then she asked him what he thought of her plan. However, judging by the man's expression, he wasn't happy. The Emperor closed his eyes wearily and said he opposed such a decision. He was sure Isbia had her reasons, but this time he had to refuse her. The girl didn't understand why he made such a decision, as she and Simon were ready to devote themselves to the research. They would help those who were suffering. Kavana said that since Isbia mentioned a cure for multiple sclerosis, she must have heard of the Kavana Trading Guild. Kavana was the most powerful merchant guild on the continent. Most trade, including trade with non-human races, went through them. Even Kavana didn't know the full extent of their power. It was unwise to make enemies with those who controlled the flow of gold on the continent. Moreover, the cure for multiple sclerosis was their main product. They wouldn't tolerate competitors. Isbia said she was aware of the risks, but she couldn't just stand by and watch people die in agony. She couldn't turn a blind eye to it. Kavana said that the court physicians were close to solving the problem, and the girl shouldn't worry. Then the protagonist jumped up from her chair. She thought the Emperor was supporting her. It seemed to her that he was happy to see her in Riadon. He claimed she was a natural empress. The man replied that it didn't matter. He wanted Isbia to live a prosperous life, but why would she risk her life when she could rule safely from the palace? Isbia raised her voice, saying she didn't want to be locked up in a playhouse, quietly drinking tea and eating sweets like a spoiled princess. She screamed that she hadn't come here to be a doll. After a moment, she realized she had said too much and hurried to apologize. Her hands were shaking. Isbia realized she had messed up again. She had yelled at the Emperor, crossing the line. She had forgotten her place because here she was nothing. Isbia had let her pride blind her because Kavana was kind to her. Then she bowed her head in guilt, begging for forgiveness, saying she hadn't meant to challenge his authority. Kavana replied that the girl didn't understand everything. He didn't want to frighten her. The man made Isbia sit on the bed, saying that he should be the one apologizing because he didn't know this matter was so important to her. The protagonist looked at her husband's face, which was clearly not angry. He looked utterly terrified. She asked what was troubling Kavana so much. The man blurted out that he was afraid. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect his loved one again. The thought terrified him, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. The man knelt before Isbia, pressing his lips to her hand. He begged to be allowed to protect her. Isbia thought to herself that she didn't understand which loved one he was referring to. Then she said that Kavana was very worried about this. If the past weighed heavily on him, then he could share that burden with her. Suddenly, the Emperor stood up and grabbed his head. He said they should talk later. Kavana walked towards the door, despite the girl's pleas for him to stay. Isbia just stared after him in surprise. The Emperor didn't return that night. The girl thought he had lost someone dear to him. But who exactly? Just then, Mariana entered the bedroom. She wished the Empress good morning. The girl had woken up early this time. The maid said she was going to put fresh flowers in the vase. Then Isbia decided to ask if she was picking flowers for her. Mariana replied that His Majesty the Emperor personally chose fresh flowers for Isbia. They were delivered to the maid every morning, and then she would bring them to the Empress's bedroom. Isbia couldn't believe it. Were all these flowers really from Kavana? She remembered their conversation in the greenhouse, when the girl had told him about her favorite flowers. And this morning, those particular flowers were in her vase. Isbia held a flower in her hand and burst into tears. Kavana wasn't a terrible person. There was no doubt about that, but she felt awful for deceiving him. The next day, Isbia went to the greenhouse. The day before, Mariana had told her that the weather was excellent today, and the Empress could take a walk in the garden before sunset. The protagonist thought that she had made Mariana worry for nothing. However, she understood that she shouldn't be here. All these flowers were making her overthink. Isbia suddenly heard a strange sound from behind the bushes. Parting the thick foliage with her hands, she saw a young man with white hair and bandages wrapped around his face. He was asleep. The girl looked at the stranger in bewilderment, not knowing who he was. The man's mouth was open, and Isbia thought that she didn't seem to have ever seen him in the palace before. The man was dressed in a military uniform, and the girl couldn't understand how he ended up here, so she decided she needed to call the guards, just in case. At that moment, the man stood up from where he was sitting and looked sullenly at the girl, while Isbia stared at the stranger in confusion. The next moment, the man screamed and called for the guards. A moment later, realizing that the new Empress was standing before him, the man laughed and said he should have recognized her sooner. He apologized for his rudeness, saying he must have just fainted. At that moment, the girl wondered what this man was actually doing here. Isbia asked for his name and rank, but the man grinned and said he wasn't in the military at all. He said his name was Jaxo, and it was an honor to be in the presence of the Empress. Isbia looked at the man in shock, wondering if this could be that Jaxo. The man was surprised that the Empress knew him. Isbia knew everything about this man. If Aslan was Kavana's left hand, then Jaxo was his right. He used to be a slave, just like the Emperor, and thanks to his military talents, he quickly rose through the ranks and became the commander of the Imperial Army. Then the girl told him he was lying, that he was the commander of the Imperial Army. The man was surprised she knew this, but he added that he was no longer in the military, that he'd grown tired of it and resigned. Jaxo said his pretty face wasn't suited for the battlefield, and that he was now free as a bird. Besides, he no longer had to listen to their dear Emperor, and he didn't want work to send him to an early grave. Isbia said that the Emperor was indeed strict when it came to work, but he was the best person she knew. Jaxo said that this description didn't match the Emperor he knew, and then he told the girl that she could be honest. He assured her there was no need to hide her true feelings. He asked if their marriage wasn't a humiliation for Ark. These words deeply stung the girl, and she didn't know how to respond. Jaxo said the Emperor was known for his bad temper, and that he instilled fear in everyone around him. The man believed the Empress had experienced this firsthand. Isbia cried out, not understanding how Jaxo could say such things about him. Wasn't he His Majesty's close friend? The man chuckled and asked if Kavana was putting on an act in front of her or if he had simply asked her to remain silent. He added that he was simply worried about the Empress, as His Majesty wasn't the most pleasant person. Isbia said the man was going too far and that she wouldn't allow him to insult her husband in front of her. She ordered Jaxo to immediately stop making these unfounded accusations. The man chuckled at these words. He said he had known the Empress since she was a child, but back then, she hadn't actually known him. However, Isbia continued to stand her ground. She said she couldn't imagine finding a better person than Kavana, who was both kind and respectful. She said she respected and loved the Emperor. Jaxo said it was touching to see the Empress so content with her married life. Isbia said this was her last warning to him. However, at that very moment, Kavana entered the greenhouse. The girl turned around and looked at her husband. She realized with horror that he had heard their entire conversation. She fearfully asked how long he had been standing there. Kavana looked away, his cheeks slightly flushed. He said he had been informed that Jaxo was here, so he came to check just in case. Jaxo chuckled and asked if the prospect of seeing the Empress had truly frightened Kavana that much. Then Jaxo said his business was concluded, wished the Emperor a good day, and quickly left the room without waiting for the Empress to say anything to him. The girl was incredibly embarrassed and didn't want to be left alone with her husband, but Kavana said they needed to talk. With a hint of awkwardness on his face, Kavana asked the girl if she had time to speak with him privately. Meanwhile, night had fallen. Kavana asked his wife if she had slept well. The girl immediately grew somber and said she hadn't, that she couldn't possibly sleep well after what happened. Isbia was upset because Kavana hadn't calmed down again that night. The girl worried that he didn't want to see her anymore. Kavana was startled. He said it was his fault, not hers. Then he raised her hand to his lips and said that he never meant to take away her freedom or threaten her. However, he knew that if Isbia hated him, despite knowing what he had done, there was nothing he could do, and he felt so helpless. So he decided that his only option was to run away like a coward. Isbia said she had no reason to hate the Emperor. She admitted she was afraid of his reaction, but there was no doubt that she understood he just wanted to protect her. Isbia said she trusted Kavana with all her heart. She also said she forgot to thank him for the flowers he sent that morning. They were beautiful. Kavana said it was just a small trinket, but for Isbia, it wasn't. Then the Emperor said he had something more fitting for his wife. He pulled a medallion from his pocket and placed it in her hand. Isbia reached out to the Emperor, holding the medallion in her palm. At that moment, the entire greenhouse was illuminated by a bright light that flickered around the room. Isbia realized it was a magical artifact. She said it was amazing, and such things weren't easy to come by. Kavana said he received it from the dwarves after a successful trade, and judging by Isbia's smile, he hadn't made a mistake with his gift. Beaming, she thanked him, saying she would never forget this day. Then the Emperor pulled her towards him and gently kissed her forehead. He said he hoped she didn't mind, but if she suddenly felt uncomfortable being so close to him, she should tell him. Then he gently placed his hand on her cheek and asked if he could continue. He said he longed to kiss her, but he needed permission. Isbia shyly said she didn't mind. The next moment, Kavana pressed his lips to hers, kissing her insistently. At that moment, Isbia remembered him, saying he hadn't been intimate with anyone before, yet he kissed like a seasoned expert. Her face flushed, and she briefly pulled away from him. Kavana told her not to hold her breath, and Isbia replied that it was difficult to control her breathing. In that case, Kavana said they should practice more. After all, at first, she was embarrassed to share a bed with him, but now she was used to it. Kissing would be the same. Kavana asked if she was all right, and Isbia replied that she liked it very much. Then the Emperor kissed her again, this time with more force. He laid her down on the bench, hovering over her as he continued to kiss her. After a while, they both noticed the lights going out. Kavana said it was the magic of the scrolls. They couldn't glow for long. Isbia was shocked. Had he really wasted magic scrolls for her? The Emperor said her smile was far more precious than any magic. He also said that he had vowed to himself that if he ever married, he would make his wife the happiest woman in the world. Weddings and families were unimaginable luxuries for a slave, Isbia thought. For her, this union was nothing more than a political marriage between two countries, but Kavana was doing everything he could to make it real. All this time, he had been kind and honest with her, while she had responded with lies and malice. Then Isbia reached out and placed her hand on his face, asking for his forgiveness. She said she knew he had forbidden her from developing the antidote for her own good. She knew all too well what it was like to watch loved ones die. But that was precisely why she needed to develop their own medicine, because sclerosis took away people's family and friends, and someone had to put an end to it. Kavana said that, in that case, he wouldn't dare stop her. He was always amazed by her determination, and he already knew what kind of person she was. Once she made a decision, she would stop at nothing. He only hoped she wouldn't neglect her own safety in pursuit of her goals. Kavana was about to kiss Isbia again when she suddenly said she had an idea. They should distribute the medicine through secret channels. She said they could create an anonymous trade guild, although it might not immediately enhance their standing, as it would be confidential. But at least they could ensure the safety of those who sold and bought the medicine. Of course, this was only possible if the Emperor allowed her and Simon to develop the medicine. Then Kavana asked if his permission was the only thing stopping her. He didn't understand how it had become a matter of needing his permission. Kavana's face flushed. He said if he had known it would make her so happy, he would have agreed immediately. Then he stood up from the bench, saying he would think about how to protect her and their research. Before he left, Isbia grabbed his sleeve and asked if he would stay in their chambers tonight. The Emperor's face flushed even more. He asked if she would be lonely sleeping alone. Isbia replied that everything here was new to her, and she still needed to get to know everyone. Before that, she needed Kavana by her side, and the man replied that he would undoubtedly always be with her. At that moment, the memories of that terrible day flashed through his mind again. He remembered how he had opened the carriage door, tears immediately welling up in his eyes. From what he saw, Isbia was lying inside, a bloody arrow protruding from her chest. He remembered how he had carried her lifeless body out, holding her in his arms, hoping she would wake up. But that didn't happen. Back in the present, the man hugged his wife tightly, vowing that he would always be by her side. When the couple returned to the palace, Kavana told the woman that there was an underground tunnel beneath this room, used as an escape route in case of emergency. There are 16 tunnels under the palace. Then Isbia asked how she could find them, as she didn't remember seeing any suspicious retractable handles anywhere. The man said they were hidden from outsiders and called her to the table. He touched a small statuette on the table, which turned out to be a switch. He told the girl to remember that the desired statuette was the third from the left, and she just needed to press the button. At that moment, a hidden door in the wall opened, revealing a long staircase leading somewhere below. Kavana walked to the doorway and extended his hand to his wife, inviting her to enter. The girl accepted his invitation, and together they descended the stairs. Kavana told Isbia to watch her step so as not to suddenly fall. He said the hall wasn't fully equipped yet, but it had everything they needed to explore. The girl was stunned. She couldn't even imagine such a place in the palace. It looked like some kind of magic. The man said that magic was what the girl was going to do, since not everyone dared to take the cure for sclerosis. Isbia chuckled and said it was all Simon's idea. Just then, Aslan and Simon entered the room, the doctor holding many thick books in his hands. The girl was surprised to see Aslan here. Then the man said he was in charge of the construction of this tunnel. When His Majesty ordered its construction, the idea seemed strange to him, but now he understood who it was all for. The man said he needed to review the research plan, since their task was serious, so his help might not be superfluous. Simon said Lord Aslan had volunteered to help organize all the patient information. The Baron said he only had patient information from the temple, but the doctor said it was still very labor-intensive work. They needed to group the patients by symptoms and then by age and gender. Isbia then turned to the men and said she was very grateful to both of them. She wondered if Lord Aslan had been extremely wary of her when they first met. But now he was trying to help her achieve her goal, and she wouldn't take that for granted. The girl tied her hair in a ponytail and said he should get started. Besides, Simon had mentioned some unfinished paperwork. Kavana looked at the girl affectionately, his cheeks slightly flushed. A week had passed since that day. Isbia went down into the tunnel and asked Simon how things were progressing. The man replied sadly that everything had stalled for now. He said that in every case, sclerosis occurred suddenly and without symptoms. The incubation period also varied, and neither age nor gender had any effect. However, he had collected everything he could find and handed the documents to the girl, for which she was very grateful. However, she thought to herself that they had been working continuously for several days, but to no avail. The lack of progress made the work unbearable. She was sure there must be at least some clue. The girl was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the inkwell on the table suddenly wobble and fall, spilling all the ink onto the table. Mariana immediately ran to her side and said she would clean everything up right away. Then Isbia noticed that all her fingers were covered in ink. Moreover, all the documents she was working with were also stained with black spots. Mariana noticed that the Empress had been working tirelessly, which was why such an embarrassment had occurred. However, Isbia said it was her duty and she shouldn't give up. The maid invited her to have some tea while she filled the bottle with new ink. Soon, Mariana made her tea using tea leaves sent by Linbella. The Empress noted that the drink tasted simply divine. The maid said that the previous Fernan royal family was doomed to watch sclerosis mercilessly claim the lives of the empire's inhabitants. For many years, people with this disease were destined to die, until Empress Isbia came to Riadon. Just the thought that someone was desperately trying to help people and their families gave them the strength to keep going. Isbia said these feelings were mutual. Without Mariana, life here would be unbearable for her. Mariana said it was worth using water from the Feck River for her tea, as the river was true evidence of the goddess' favor upon their land. All the surrounding waters flowed into the Feck, and the clear water from its source was considered ideal for brewing. The maid spoke from experience, having grown up in a village near the upper reaches of the Feck River, where the locals drank directly from it, the water being so pure. Isbia said, "That sounded idyllic. Ark had no great rivers like the Feck." Then she asked Mariana how long she had lived there, and the maid replied that she had lived there until she was 14. She had to go to the capital to find work to support her family. Edith had moved in after their parents died, and she had multiple sclerosis and needed care. Isbia was shocked that Mariana hadn't contracted sclerosis despite living under the same roof as her sister. Edith had arrived in the capital already infected, having lived alone for many years before that. The village guarded the Feck River. Suddenly, the girl jumped up from her chair, consumed by the thought of the great river that collected the waters of the entire country. She abruptly reached for the ink-stained documents. Isbia couldn't believe it. Could the source of the infection be the Feck River? Shortly thereafter, she went to the emperor and said she should have guessed sooner. Now she wanted to investigate the river. Sclerosis was spreading throughout the country, but some areas were less affected. These areas had recently prospered due to mining, and the Feck River did not flow through them. She said that in these areas, only those migrants who came looking for work were infected. Therefore, she theorized that sclerosis was transmitted through water. Sometime later, Isbia set off to investigate the river. A young boy approached her and offered to sell her a rose. He said it was watered with the Feck River, imbued with the goddess's grace, and an ideal gift for newlyweds. The boy quickly realized the two might not be newlyweds at all and hastily apologized, but Isbia said it was all right. She had come here with Kavana and said they were just starting their new month together. The Empress said she had never disguised herself before, but it seemed her disguise was working for now. No one recognized them. The Emperor said he wasn't used to this. He had never disguised himself during the day. Usually, such tasks were carried out at night. Isbia said that sounded intriguing, but the man said she shouldn't leave the palace at night. After all, even in such peaceful times, one could never predict what dangers she might encounter. They had come this far all because of her investigation. The girl hadn't even thought the Emperor would be so worried since he had agreed. Kavana said he had his doubts when she made the request. However, he had decided to listen to his wife, as she had become one of the leading experts in sclerosis research, and even Simon and Oslin admired her insights. Isbia said the man was flattering her. However, the Emperor was serious. The girl was a natural-born politician. Increasingly, this was becoming a problem, as no disguise could hide her radiance. The girl tried to laugh it off, saying there was nothing special about her, but her cheeks flushed at such a compliment. Kavana pulled her closer and kissed her, saying that even now, he couldn't stop admiring her beauty. They kissed for a while, but soon Isbia said they shouldn't, as they had important matters to attend to. The man said he would go and take water samples, and the girl decided to ask around. Perhaps she could learn something from the locals. Then the emperor said that if anything happened, she needed to signal the man in blue behind the tree. It turned out he was referring to Commander Jaxo, who had been watching them all along. Kavana said he was no longer a commander, just a retired soldier carrying out his instructions, and the girl shouldn't pay him any mind. The man then went to the river to take water samples. Isbia said she would wait for him. She thought to herself that it was good that despite all his fears, he had allowed her to do this. Without his permission, everything would have been much more difficult. All the evidence pointed to the river, but it was best to confirm her suspicions. After all, not everyone who drank from the river contracted sclerosis. The girl realized that the local flowers might know something. Then she touched one of the flowers with her finger, wanting to hear their voices. The flowers immediately begged for help, saying there was something in the water and inviting the girl to see their memories. From that day forward, Isbia saw a stranger in a long black coat walk to the riverbank. He lowered his hand and touched the surface of the water. A moment later, a dark, black energy flowed from his hand, filling the river. Isbia knew something was wrong here. She had never felt such fear. She suddenly realized she recognized this magic. It was the very reason she had been killed in her past life. Isbia couldn't understand why she sensed the same magical imprint from the water. The alchemist who had worked with her brother, Dietrich, should be in Canach. Could he really be the same person who polluted the Feck River? It turned out Dietrich was the mastermind behind all of this. Isbia was so shocked that she didn't even notice her hat flying off her head. She couldn't accept that countless innocent citizens were now in danger. She paused by the river, lost in thought. If Dietrich was behind all of this, what was his goal? If the alchemist working for Dietrich could curse an entire river, then waging war would be child's play. They could have done it effortlessly, but they did the opposite, spreading the disease downstream, even though they knew the right medicine could delay sclerosis for years. So, Isbia suddenly realized that someone was monopolizing the medicine through the guild and manipulating the price. She remembered Dietrich saying that he had someone else on his side, whose help was beyond imagination. She also remembered Mariana's meeting with Baron Edwin. The Baron had asked her for a small favor and promised a generous reward. He said that discord had to be sown between him and the nobles to bring Riadon to its knees. Isbia concluded that Dietrich was using these earnings to destroy the empire from within. The Gilera Trade Guild had been working with her brother all along. She decided she had to tell Kavana before it was too late. Just then, Kavana walked towards her, holding her hat. Isbia immediately rushed towards the emperor, wanting to tell him that things were far more serious than they had anticipated. However, she stopped abruptly, doubting whether he would believe her. She didn't know if she could bear the consequences of telling him the truth, as she might not be able to convince him. She couldn't simply state her findings without revealing how she obtained this information. She remembered Dietrich's words. To outsiders, her so-called magic was nothing more than a cheap trick, and all their subjects would be disappointed to learn that their princess's abilities were limited to chatting with plants. Isbia was afraid that Kavana would be disappointed after learning about her insignificant ability. Then, he embraced her, saying everything was all right. She didn't understand why her husband had suddenly decided to hug her so tightly. Kavana said he did it because she couldn't calmly tell him everything. Although he didn't know what had happened, he was sure of one thing. He wouldn't doubt a single word she said. He said he completely trusted Isbia, and these words made her cry. She clung tightly to the emperor, determined to tell him the whole truth. Soon night fell. Kavana learned about her abilities, but he couldn't even imagine such a thing was possible. Isbia said she would understand if he was disappointed in her. Even she didn't want her secret to be known by others. He asked her what she was talking about, because if it weren't for her abilities, they would never have been able to find the source of the disease. They all owed her their lives. Isbia shyly lowered her head, grateful for his trust. She said she was glad to be of help and promised to end the sclerosis soon. It seemed to her that she was very close to a solution. After that, the two returned to the tunnel. Isbia said they needed to carefully study the patient's conditions after taking the existing medicine. She thought that now they knew the cause, so it was futile to further look for commonalities among the patients. Apparently, the Healer's Trade Guild's medicine contained a special ingredient that counteracted the disease. Then Simon said, if you think about it that way, the patients whose condition improved, that would have white spots on their bodies. It turned out that the patients did indeed have white spots on their chests and abdomens. Then Isbia remembered that Edith had the exact same symptoms. He added that all these patients were in critical condition before their condition improved. Aslan said that although sclerosis was currently incurable, these patients had definitely taken pain-relieving medication, and one of the ingredients was believed to cause these spots. Simon angrily exclaimed that it was possible, but magic could change the structure of the medicine, making it difficult to identify. Then Isbia said that skin spots were most common among elves. She had read about it in a book. It was apparently related to elven herbs. Isbia then suggested that perhaps elven herbs could be used to make medicine. If so, that might be the key clue they had been looking for. The girl then proposed that elven grass could be utilized to create medicine. If so, it might be the crucial clue they had been seeking all along. Meanwhile, in the Ark Forest, Dietrich met with a stranger cloaked in black. The stranger said that Dietrich, the mage, was the only person in the Ark Forest he would wait for. It turned out the stranger's name was Roman. Dietrich asked for Roman's forgiveness, saying he had been delayed by some business. Dietrich asked Roman how his experiments were progressing. Roman replied that Dietrich would be very pleased with the results soon. Trade with the other races was also quite profitable. The income from medicine was enough to cover all expenses. Dietrich wished his sister was half as useful as Roman, but she couldn't even gather a single piece of useful information for him. Roman chuckled. Roman asked if His Majesty remembered his advice. He said Dietrich urgently needed to deal with the princess once she became an obstacle to them. Dietrich asked if his sister had already become an obstacle to them. Roman replied that their spies reported the emperor and empress had gone out incognito to meet Faiha. Perhaps it was just a harmless daytime outing, but perhaps not. Extra vigilance never hurt. Dietrich asked if they had really guessed anything, but Roman assured him that the princess would never catch him. After all, to her, he was just a faceless shadow in the dark. Meanwhile, in the tunnel, a heated discussion about the medicine was underway. Simon couldn't understand how he hadn't thought to check all the ingredients of the medicine. Apparently, he knew nothing about magic. Isbia wanted to retort, but Simon immediately ran up to her, beaming. He took her hand and said it was incredible. Simon said he was eager to learn more about herbs. It could take the research to a whole new level. Many scientists didn't give herbalism the attention it deserved. Just then, Kavana entered the tunnel. Kavana said their search seemed likely to be successful. Isbia immediately ran up to him and said they had identified one of the ingredients. It was a herb widely used by dark elves, but this presented a problem, as they had no way of obtaining elven herbs. Then the emperor said there was a possibility. Aslan confirmed his words. Aslan said His Majesty had taken several measures to combat the trade monopoly with non-human races. They had managed to establish trade relations with the gnomes without the guild's knowledge. Perhaps this fact could help them, as the gnomes and dark elves were longtime allies. Isbia couldn't believe her ears. Could they really use these connections to arrange a meeting with the dark elves? Soon, Aslan arrived at the tavern for the meeting. A red-bearded dwarf was waiting for him. The dwarf said that meeting with the elves was the stupidest thing he'd heard all day. Aslan tried to reason with him, but didn't understand what he meant. Aslan felt that the dwarf trusted him. Then the dwarf said he wouldn't argue, as the deal would only make their wallets fatter. Considering the guild's monopoly on trade with the Dark Elves, they had even considered establishing trade relations with other partners, but this was a completely different matter. And although the dwarves, had good relations with the elves' hatred for humans was far deeper than anyone could imagine. Even if the dwarves interceded, the elves would never agree to meet with humans. He also said the elves were under attack, many of the victims being those who had settled near human settlements, and humans were being blamed. Aslan realized their entire plan was about to fall apart. The dwarf said the elves were indeed their longtime allies, but he couldn't just bring humans to them, especially since Aslan hadn't even told him his real name. The dwarf said that if Aslan just wanted their herbs, he had some seeds he could give him as thanks for their mutual business. Despite Aslan trying to stop him, the dwarf turned and bid him farewell, wishing him good luck. Aslan took the bag and brought it to the emperor. Kavana said he had no idea the elves were going through such difficult times. Isbia said they had managed to get the seeds, but she doubted they could successfully grow them without the elves' help. Kavana was upset that he had disappointed his wife, but Isbia said it was all right, as he couldn't have foreseen all of this. Isbia understood it was too early to give up. Kavana and Aslan had done everything possible to obtain the seeds. Now everything depended on her. She had to find a solution. Several days passed since then. Once, the emperor ran into his wife in an underground tunnel, saying she had developed a habit of starting her day there. Isbia said she had discovered records stating that dark elves used magic to grow herbs. Although her magic wasn't very effective, it combined well with earth energy. All that could be done now was to watch and wait. She believed these seeds were the only clue they had at the moment. She had to make them sprout, but she doubted her magic was strong enough. Suddenly, Kavana turned Isbia towards him, leaned down, and told her she felt cold, then asked how long she had been there. He said Mariana was worried about her health. Mariana added that the Empress hadn't been eating or sleeping well and had lost a lot of weight quickly. He said Mariana wasn't the only one worried. Kavana kissed Isbia's hand and said everyone was concerned about her. They all wanted Isbia to be free from the difficult time that was suffocating her, and they were doing everything they could to help. He himself longed for the days when he could bring flowers to his still sleeping wife. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time and begged Isbia not to leave him alone today. Isbia then thought that she had indeed lost sight of her reasons for fighting and forgotten the people who gave her the strength to keep trying. It was also because of this man that she had come to love and cherish this land. Isbia moved closer to Kavana and placed her hand on his cheek. She asked if she could kiss him. Isbia said she understood if it was unexpected, but Kavana interrupted her, saying it had been a long time and they should practice more. Kavana leaned in to kiss his wife, but Isbia stopped him. She moved towards the emperor herself, saying she would take the initiative this time. Kavana passionately kissed Isbia's lips, then wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing her closer against the table. He kissed his way down her neck, covering it with fervent kisses that made Isbia moan softly. When it was over, Kavana pulled his wife onto his lap, saying he didn't know when he would have another opportunity like this, so he didn't want to let her go now. However, he said he wouldn't keep her for too long, as he fully understood she had a lot of work to do. He just wanted to savor this moment a little longer. Then Isbia suddenly said that in her homeland of Ark, the people called her the last hope. For centuries, they had been without protection, and they placed their hopes in her, hoping that one day she would restore Ark to its former glory. Everyone depended on her, and without realizing it, she had taken on this unbearable burden. However, thanks to Kavana, everything had changed. He made her understand that some people truly cared about her, and no matter what she was like, these people would accept her, and she only needed to return the support. If she were to fight her illness, it could only be with the emperor by her side, as no one was more worthy of her trust. Suddenly, Isbia felt something in Kavana's pocket. Kavana, a little embarrassed, said he needed to take it out. It turned out to be a bottle of river water collected this morning, which Kavana thought Isbia might need a fresh sample of for her research. Kavana suddenly pressed the bottle to his forehead and said he was sometimes surprised at how pathetic he was. After all, if he couldn't even help the Empress, what was the point of the throne? If he were a mage, he could be of real use. Isbia laughed and said it sounded like he had become emperor for her sake. Kavana said he had. Isbia said Baron Aslan wouldn't appreciate the joke, but Kavana said he wasn't joking. He said there was a time when he longed for powerful magic, enough to change the world by his own will. Isbia then said it was a good thing he had chosen a different path. She then reached out to take the bottle. She told him to imagine the bottle was his heart, and the water inside was the amount of magic he could hold. Every creature is born with a predetermined amount of magic. Some may have very little, only enough to fill a bottle. Meanwhile, others are born with the equivalent of an entire river. Such people are called mages. Very few people can become mages. Even those with magical talent often don't have enough magic to unlock their potential. To wield magic, one must at least come from other races such as elves. Kavana laughed and said Isbia was crushing human dreams. Isbia said she was just trying to paint him an objective picture. He then asked Isbia if she had ever met a mage, and Isbia replied that she had never met one. However, she always wanted to meet them because mages have a special magical mark that other magically capable individuals can recognize. Suddenly, Isbia froze, lost in thought. Thinking back, she had sensed something from Edith. Although the mark was too faint for her to understand immediately, it couldn't be a mistake. It turned out Edith was someone born with magical talent, which explained everything. Isbia found it strange that sclerosis was spreading among humans when the key to the cure was elven herbs. Skin discoloration was common among elves because they all had a natural affinity for magic, and this symptom was somehow spreading through infected sclerosis. It turned out the disease was a weapon targeting those with magical abilities. Isbia ran out of the room, still unable to shake off these thoughts, and not even Kavana could stop her. Meanwhile, the story shifted to the office of Guild Master Gil Roman, who said there was an urgent matter that required his men's involvement and asked how the preparations for the banquet were going. The man replied that everything was proceeding according to plan and all the invitations had been sent out. However, Gil said he had one more invitation to deliver. These were the distinguished guests he was eagerly awaiting, and the letter was addressed to the Imperial Palace. Soon, Baron Edwin came to see Mariana again, asking how she and her mistress were doing. The maid replied that she was doing well, performing her duties regularly as always, and spending her free time in the library. She hadn't contacted anyone since the tea party, so Mariana assumed she didn't really enjoy socializing with the nobility. Edwin chuckled, saying that she had become a useless princess in a cage again. Mariana said she hadn't noticed anything unusual. Then, the man handed her an invitation to the Guild Trade Guild's banquet, saying it was a gesture of goodwill from the nobles before the cure spread throughout the country. He asked Mariana to bring the banquet to the Empress's attention, as Her Majesty should be interested in the opportunity to find new and useful connections. If it proved difficult to persuade her, then she needed to leave the invitation where she would find it, such as in her chambers. The maid then asked whose orders these were specifically, Baron Edwin's or his partner's. The man replied that it didn't matter. The event would be extremely memorable, and he would await Mariana's news. The girl simply watched him leave in silence, unsure of what to say. Meanwhile, Isbia decided to visit Edith in the hospital ward. She touched her hand, realizing she was right. Everyone who had come here with sclerosis had magic. Then the Empress stood up and turned to Simon, who had come with her, and said, she seemed to have uncovered the truth behind the disease. Soon, everyone gathered to discuss the matter. The girl said she felt traces of magic in everyone infected with sclerosis, and it wasn't just a coincidence. Sclerosis only spread among those with a predisposition to magic. Kavana worried about what would happen to a certain man's wife, meaning she herself was also in danger. Isbia told her not to worry, as she hadn't noticed any symptoms yet. She said she tried soaking her hands in river water, suppressing her magic as much as possible, but her fingers only went numb, with no other symptoms. Apparently, the disease only affected those with trace amounts of magic, and many people didn't even realize they possessed it, as it was so faint. And this evil plan had affected most of the Empire's citizens. Hearing about this plan, Aslan immediately asked if the Empress really meant to say that sclerosis was man-made, and the girl confirmed it. The girl believed the disease was a result of magical interference with the Faiha River water. She apologized for not telling them sooner, saying she wanted to confirm everything herself before voicing her suspicions. Aslan said better late than never and thanked her for her honesty. He added that they just needed to find a solution and asked if she knew what kind of magic was used. However, the girl didn't know the answer to this question, as magic was similar to writing in many ways, and the truth could only be revealed through the most painstaking research. To dispel the magic cast on the river, they first needed to figure out the purpose of the spell and put an end to it. This was a near impossible task unless they interrogated the caster directly. Thus, everyone concluded that there must be a connection between the guild master and the sorcerer. To this, Simon exclaimed, they were risking the innocent lives of ordinary people for profit, after all, who would deliberately commit such an atrocity. Isbia said they needed to control themselves. All was not lost. She reported that Mariana had received an invitation from the guildmaster. Aslan realized they wanted to spread the cure throughout the empire and intended to announce it at the banquet. The girl said the invitation was for her, and they wanted to see her at the banquet. Then Aslan slapped the table and said it wasn't even up for discussion. He realized they were running out of time, but they shouldn't step into such an obvious trap. Kavana placed his hand on his wife Isbia's shoulder, saying she shouldn't do it. Isbia said she was well aware of the risks, but if she knew people were dying and did nothing, the situation would only get worse. Furthermore, there was a chance the sorcerer would be at the banquet, and even if he didn't show up, she could find a connection between the guild master and this sorcerer. She said she and the emperor could do this together. She wanted a man present when she met with Guild Master Gil Roman, desperately needing his help. The emperor knelt and kissed her hand, saying he couldn't refuse such trust. He then ordered a reply to the guild master, a decision that infuriated Aslan. But the emperor declared that he and Empress Isbia would gladly accept the invitation to the banquet. Soon, The day of the banquet arrived. Isbia had expected a social gathering, but they had even prepared a hunting ground. She knew the guild had a long history, but she hadn't realized they possessed such a vast forest. The emperor remarked that the forest was teeming with insects and wild animals. You never knew when you might be attacked. It was too dangerous, and she was so fragile. As she pondered this, Mariana's words echoed in her mind. The emperor visited the kitchen every day. The maid herself had only discovered this yesterday and immediately reported it to the empress. His Majesty tasted the dishes for her, insisting on trying every single one to ensure they were safe, undoubtedly adding to the chef's workload. She couldn't understand why he would go to such lengths for her. Mariana surmised that he cared deeply for her and her well-being. When Isbia expressed her desire to attend the banquet herself, everyone was worried. However, now knowing how important she was to the emperor, everyone was certain she would return home safely. As long as the emperor was by her side, she had nothing to fear. So she should go, for all of them, for the future of this country. Suddenly, that strange voice echoed in her mind again. However, just then, the emperor spoke to her, and she immediately banished the intruders from her thoughts. She wondered who she was to him. She wondered what she felt for him. The emperor said if she changed her mind, she only had to say so. It wasn't too late to leave. She took his hand, saying nothing could go wrong with him by her side. There were some things she could say with confidence. She felt incredibly safe with him. A horn interrupted her thoughts. A red-haired man took the stage, thanking the honored guests for their presence. Isbia listened intently to his voice, hanging on every word. The man introduced himself as Roman, welcoming everyone to the celebration. Then she realized this was the guild master. Roman said that before they began, he wanted to remind everyone that every creature in this forest was under strict surveillance. The guests' safety was their highest priority, so they could enjoy the hunt. The emperor said he would enter the forest. She should stay near the edge. He would do his best to acquire the information they needed. Isbia wished him a good hunt, and they parted ways. She handed the emperor her handkerchief, explaining the southern custom of giving a handkerchief to a knight they wished to stay by their side. The emperor kissed the handkerchief, thinking that this time he would surely be her knight. Meanwhile, Roman took center stage, addressing everyone present. He declared the hunt open. Soon, Isbia, Simon, and Yakshal arrived at their designated location. She thought it should be fairly remote. This forest was one of the guild's mission locations. There had to be at least some clues here. Then she leaned against a tree, saying she needed its help and asked it to share its wisdom. However, the moment the tree realized it was the witch speaking to it, it immediately pushed her away. Isbia realized something was wrong. Trees weren't usually this afraid of her. She then asked it to calm down, saying she meant no harm and only wanted to ask it about the forest master. The tree continued to yell at her, calling her a traitor and a destroyer, saying her place was in hell. Suddenly, she felt an incomprehensible sensation. She realized the tree had decided to share its memories. In its memories, she saw a carriage filled with withered trees. She wondered what was inside. Suddenly, she saw a dead man's hand reach out from the carriage. Someone picked it up, saying the shipment wasn't ready yet. Things would progress a little slower. She quickly realized it was Guild Master Gil Roman's voice. She didn't understand why he needed corpses or what those strange sounds surrounding the carriage were. Isbia noticed that as the man removed his hood, his body began to change. She couldn't believe her eyes. Was this truly magic? Roman quickly transformed into a man with white hair and purple eyes. He said he would see what use these corpses had for the heroine. She couldn't believe it. The sorcerer had been disguised as the guild master all along. The magic alone was worth it, but she hadn't even imagined such a powerful sorcerer existed. Suddenly, the man turned sharply and looked directly at where the girl was standing. At that moment, she was suddenly thrown out of the memory. The tree said that the man, because of whom this land was now in ruins, had incurred the wrath of the goddess. And in this forest, he was disposing of failed experiments and their corpses. The girl stared blankly ahead, not understanding what was happening here. Soon, the girl returned to the banquet, where the emperor was already waiting for her. He noticed her quick return and asked if anything bad had happened. However, before Isbia could answer, Roman suddenly approached her. He said that words couldn't express how honored he was to host the Empress of Riadon in his home. The girl silently watched him from close range. The magic felt more real, something she had never seen before. Such powerful magic was beyond her comprehension. The girl felt that this was the same sorcerer who served her brother, but it wasn't. Their magical signatures were different. However, there was still a slight possibility that they were the same person. She wondered what he had done with those corpses. Had they truly found a cure through human experimentation? Roman continued his speech, saying he was delighted to see the Emperor and Empress here and couldn't wait to discuss the future of the Empire with them. He said the Empire was in turmoil for countless reasons, and sclerosis was only one of them. Isbia trembled, but she decided she had to pull herself together. She needed to expose his true motives behind monopolizing the medicine. Then, the girl said that it was said the Men's Guild had built many pharmacies throughout the Empire to make medicine more accessible. It was commendable, but she still doubted whether the supply of medicine was the real reason. Why couldn't ordinary people afford it? Roman replied that all these difficulties were beyond his capabilities. He was only responsible for obtaining permission from the Empire to open pharmacies. Even ordinary people who hadn't heard of Jaela and her influence were interested in buying their products and receiving the necessary treatment. They simply wanted to help people return to their normal lives and give them peace of mind. The girl wanted to retort, but the man interrupted her. He said that in the current situation, only two aspects were crucial for a nation's survival: military power and capital. Without these, a ruler could not maintain the loyalty of their subjects. In turn, Roman was merely providing them with a way to ensure the continued loyalty of their subjects. Then the heroine said that apparently the well-being of their people was the last thing on this man's mind. She trembled, but continued, saying Roman was asking the Empire for permission while shamelessly admitting he was only after profit. Why was all this happening? She was going mad trying to figure out Dietrich's plan, but each day only brought new enemies. Isbia was sure she couldn't do anything alone, and at that moment, ghostly hands reached for her shoulders again. At that moment, the Emperor placed his hand on his wife's shoulder, thus driving away the ghost from her. He said that if that was Roman's goal, then the Empire was forced to deny his guild permission. The Empress didn't seem to like his request, and he was just an obedient husband who wanted to make his wife happy. Roman smiled hypocritically and said that he was grateful that they had considered his proposal anyway. So he decided to end this conversation so as not to spoil their impression of the celebration, and said that the esteemed guests would have more interesting things to do today. Soon, all the guests went outside to watch the beautiful fireworks display. The Emperor asked his wife what she wanted to tell him, but the girl said she couldn't say it here either, as there were many eyes and ears around. Isbia thought that sometimes the situation seemed completely hopeless and the goals she wanted to achieve seemed utterly impossible. The Emperor looked at the girl with concern, not understanding what she was thinking. Isbia thought that Kavana always managed to calm her down somehow, as long as he was by her side. Then she said that everything was fine. With him by her side, nothing could go wrong. The girl leaned in to kiss him, thinking that she was still trying to sort out her feelings for him. She wasn't even sure she could find the right words to describe their relationship. But once they solved the problems and prevented the impending war, she wanted to open up to him so that he could accept the real her. The lovers kissed tenderly, thinking the moment should last forever, then suddenly realized what they had done and blushed crimson. The Emperor turned away from the girl, saying he would get her a drink. He took the glass from a servant and tasted it to make sure there was no poison. Only when he was sure everything was all right did he hand the glass to the girl. Isbia said it wasn't her who needed the poison test, but the Emperor. The man said he wasn't as important as she thought, but the girl had a different opinion. He said he bet no one here had his resilience, so she couldn't find a better poison tester. Then he turned to Isbia, wondering why she was silent. Suddenly, he saw blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Kavana immediately rushed towards her, the glass of wine falling from his hand. However, the girl's eyes were already clouded with a bloody haze, and the last thing she saw was her husband's shocked face. She didn't understand what was happening, because he had said everything will be all right. The girl collapsed, and the Emperor instantly caught her, trying to hold her in his arms. He said it was all his fault that he had been too greedy. He would give his life for Isbia. That was his wish. Kavana clung tightly to the woman's body and began to weep. He said he would never forgive this. He swore he would find the culprit and have him drawn and quartered alive. He would rip out the murderer's tongue as he begged for mercy. He would make his family watch, feeling the same pain as him. Isbia tried to stop him. She shouldn't leave him, but her condition was too bad, and she couldn't utter a word. She understood that if nothing was done now, then everything would repeat itself. The war would break out again. Meanwhile, the fireworks continued. All the other guests were stunned by what was happening before their eyes. Only Roman stood above the couple, smiling contentedly. Kavana pressed himself against his wife's blood-stained dress, feeling life draining from her second by second. The man tried to revive her, but to no avail. Simon said through tears that maybe they still had time to save her. They needed to do something before it was too late, but the Emperor didn't seem to hear anyone, his eyes vacant. Suddenly, he heard a voice telling him that he had failed again. The voice said the Emperor knew this was his only chance, but he still missed it. The man wanted to scream in helplessness when suddenly someone touched his shoulder. It was Yakshul. He said they had caught the culprit. The man confessed everything, saying he had poisoned the Empress's wine. Kavana carefully placed the girl on the ground and stood up. Yakshul said they needed to take the culprit away and begin the investigation, but the man didn't listen. With his sword in hand, he silently walked towards him. Kavana raised his sword, aiming for the chef's head, and then abruptly slashed down. However, he didn't kill the man, only striking the ground with his sword. Instead, he put his boot on the man's head, yelling and demanding to know where to find the antidote. But the man said he knew nothing about it. The Emperor didn't believe him, as he had confessed to everything himself and now dared to play dumb. Then he raised his sword at him again, asking who his master was. Meanwhile, Isbia felt strange. She was in pain. Her whole body seemed to be burning. She didn't understand what was happening, feeling like she was dying. Before losing consciousness, she suddenly heard her husband's voice. She understood that if she died now, the future would repeat itself. So she needed to calm down and think. The girl wondered if it really was the wine, but Kavana had tasted it and been fine. It must have been some substance that only worked on a specific victim. It was something that affected those with magic like hardening. Isbia realized she needed to try and remember how she had adjusted the magic for the experiments. She intended to enhance her magic so the poison wouldn't work. She understood that she had to survive. The protagonist intended to fight to the last moment so as not to repeat the mistakes of her past life. Night fell quickly, and it was pouring rain outside. Aslan asked how long the Emperor intended to keep the nobles locked up in the palace. After all, even if they were staying in the guest wing, they wouldn't remain silent. One couldn't lock up nobles without reason. Kavana said the culprit acted on the orders of a noble. What other reason did he need? Then he yelled that it was the chef from the palace kitchen, the man the Emperor himself had chosen for the position. Furthermore, his motive was a dream. Even under torture, he didn't change his testimony. The chef said it was a great nation built on the sacrifices of its people, and the Emperor dared to share a bed with a creature of another race, desecrating their memory. He said he had done a righteous deed and was now ready to die for it. The Emperor wanted to cut off his head immediately. Only Yakshul could restrain his rage. Kavana knew he was clinging to some deeply ingrained notion, and it was obvious, but a mere chef couldn't have orchestrated all of this alone. He said the previous dynasty was obsessed with blood purity, so if the Fernan family was involved, it wouldn't be surprising. But Aslan argued against it. After all the Fernan family members were long dead. The Emperor had killed every last one of them. Kavana said he couldn't be sure of that, as someone could have survived. Then Yakshul grinned. He said the chef had confessed to everything. Was it really necessary to dwell on the overthrown ruling family? At best, the Emperor would only expose himself as an unreliable fool in the eyes of the court nobles. Yakshul said his empire had just risen from the ashes. In his, Yakshul's, opinion, even so, Kavana, as the ruler, seemed unwilling to do everything in his power for the empire. They had rebuilt Riadon from scratch, and they were responsible for it. However, the Emperor didn't want to hear any of this. He slapped Yakshul's hand and walked away. He cursed, saying to hell with it all. Kavana said it had been 5 days, and Isbia still hadn't woken up. Nothing could help her. Then he said he was going to interrogate the nobles. He was going to torture the truth out of them himself, and afterwards they would beg for death. Yakshul was furious. The Emperor had arrested the nobles without any evidence, and now he was going to torture them. This useless girl had driven him, Kavana, mad. However, Aslan told Yakshul to watch his words, saying that Isbia was Kavana's wife and that Kavana felt misunderstood. Yakshul cursed, saying Aslan had no idea what he was talking about because Aslan hadn't seen Kavana like this. He said this wasn't the Kavana they knew. He had completely lost his mind. Meanwhile, the Emperor continued to keep vigil by his wife's bedside, holding her hand tightly, hoping that one day she would react, move. During this time, the rain hadn't stopped throughout the entire empire, and deep inside, Isbia was still alive. She really wanted to help the Emperor. The story flashes back to the Riha mountain region many years ago. Once upon a time, In these mountains, a quarrel broke out between people. One of them said that some impertinent bug dared to defy his master, and for that the boy was beaten. The young man said he met slaves who forgot their place every year, and every time he taught them a lesson. Then he demanded that the useless boy be locked in the stables. It turned out that this boy was Kavana himself. He was 14 years old at the time. The boy was locked up with the horses. They ordered that not a drop of water was to be given to the boy without his permission. He wanted to see how long the boy could last in there. Kavana just silently watched the retreating figures of his tormentors. He didn't know how many days he had been imprisoned. He was parched, not a single drop of water, and he knew he would die of thirst soon. Then he thought maybe it was for the best. But just then, a blonde girl approached the stables. She wanted to sneak over to see who was in the stables, but accidentally tripped over a haystack. Kavana immediately jumped up and asked who she was. The girl apologized, saying she just saw someone lying there, so she decided to come and check. It turned out that this girl was Isbia. The boy was surprised at how she slipped past the guards, but the girl said there was no one outside. Kavana thought to himself that they really had left him here to die, without even bothering to post a guard, because they were certain he was doomed. Isbia asked the boy if he was all right. She wanted to call a doctor for him, but Kavana told her not to waste her time. He told her to just leave him to die, as nobles never cared about the lives of slaves. Isbia didn't understand why he would say that. She couldn't just leave him here to die. The boy was too sick to take care of himself. He could think whatever he wanted, but she was going to help him. The girl continued to visit him every day. Kavana didn't understand who she was, as she didn't even know him, but she brought him food and medicine every day, and he was curious what a rich girl like her was doing in such a remote place. Then Isbia finally decided to introduce herself. She gave her name and said she was from the Alki kingdom, just north of here. Kavana was astonished. He knew that Alki was the kingdom that sent reinforcements for this demon hunting operation. Meanwhile, the palace guards were still searching for the princess, but she didn't make a sound. Then Kavana realized that she wasn't just a rich girl. She was just a bored little princess who had found a dirty slave boy to play with. Apparently, for someone who had never left the palace, this was something new. Suddenly, the boy noticed that the girl's leg was bandaged, and he asked her what happened. She said that yesterday she'd dirted her clothes, and her brother had seen, becoming furious. He was looking for a suitor for her, wanting her to marry Vannon, a member of the royal family. The girl had been distracted, even though she should have made a good impression, so Dietrich scolded her harshly, resulting in her leg injury. He then held her tightly in his arms, crying and begging for forgiveness, saying he shouldn't have taken his anger out on her, and promising it wouldn't happen again. Upon hearing the royal family member's name, Vannon, Kavana roared, claiming that the man was no royal, just a distant relative of the Fernan ruling family. The man didn't have silver hair or violet eyes. If he were a prince, he wouldn't be hunting monsters in such a desolate place. Kavana said Vannon was only tormenting the slave for amusement, so the boy, Kavana, intervened, determined not to let the man leave alive. The boy said the man was a villain, someone a girl shouldn't try to please. She shouldn't put herself in danger for a lowly slave. He begged the princess not to visit him again. Then Isbia said she truly didn't want to marry that man. Her leg had throbbed with pain all night, but she was too afraid to say anything. She convinced herself it was her own fault, that it was easier for everyone that way. But now she realized she was just turning a blind eye to everything. She had decided to become Vannon's wife without even trying to understand what kind of person he was. However, Kavana was different. Unlike her, he didn't stand idly by. He did everything in his power to protect others. The girl said that birth didn't define a person. Her brother's anger wouldn't stop her from visiting him. She promised to take the boy with her to Alki, where he would become her knight. In the south, the legend goes that a lady gives her scarf to the knight she admires. Kavana's voice trembled as he said he wasn't a knight at all. Isbia, with a bright smile, said that to her. He was the most incomparable knight. The boy never forgot that promise. For the first time in his life, he began to look forward to the future, no longer ashamed of himself. However, he never got the chance to say that it wasn't him who was incomparable, but Isbia. The next morning, he was sent to the battlefield. Yet, the boy kept wondering if she still remembered their promise. From that day on, he did everything he could just to see Isbia again. Kavana hoped to become worthy of her favor. He waited for the moment he could reunite with her and become her knight. He put in all his effort to earn a place by her side, and in doing so, he grasped power. Standing before the throne of the murdered emperor, he suddenly heard Isbia's voice and even seemed to see her curly hair. He couldn't believe he was truly seeing his beloved before him. The emperor fulfilled his dream and married Isbia. But their marriage was doomed to break apart, for the girl was killed. As he held her cold body, sitting in front of the carriage where she was murdered, he remembered her words, that to Isbia he was the greatest knight. Tears streamed down his face. He held his wife's remains in despair, unable to believe she was truly gone. It turned out Isbia, her perception back then, was wrong. He failed to save everything he had fought so hard for. There was nothing left for Kavana to pursue in life. He had nothing left to fight for. He didn't even know which path was the right one now. He couldn't become her knight. As he watched the empire crumble amidst the horrors of revolution, Yakshul ran to him. He said they had found a book in the king's chambers. The book stated that every ruler has the right to see the silver forest, the guardian deity of the country. Upon seeing the deity, one can make a wish. Then Kavana realized that if he became the king of Alki, he could bring Isbia back to life. The endless battles continued, with all cities engulfed in flames. Kavana searched the entire city for the person he needed, but the man was nowhere to be found. The last heir and current ruler of the cathedral family, Dietrich Cathedral. To see the silver forest, Kavana, had to kill him, Dietrich, and seize the throne. Every day, Kavana clutched the handkerchief Isbia had given him. Then she told him, according to the intelligence received, the mage who killed Her Majesty was in the service of the king of Alki. If this was true, then they had the name of the person responsible for the empress's death. Kavana gripped the handkerchief tightly, determined to avenge his beloved wife. However, Aslan asked, was this truly necessary? Because Alki was already on the verge of collapse. They had been storming the northern mountains for months to capture the king, who would destroy himself if left alone. Aslan, was displeased because the emperor's Kavana's decision would turn the lands of Alki into a wasteland. To him, Kavana, the throne of this small kingdom was more important than his responsibility to the people of the empire. He then implied that this was related to the exorbitant amount of magic stones the emperor was spending to preserve the empress's body. Aslan went on to report that Yakshul had been killed while trying to track down Dietrich, whom the emperor had been desperately searching for. He was ambushed by northern troops. Then Aslan cried out, was this truly the empire Kavana wanted? He began to weep, begging the emperor to at least now think of the empire and all of them. However, Kavana only convulsively gripped his deceased wife's hand, unwilling to answer. Aslan watched everything unfold before him, and through his tears, he recalled the good times he had spent drinking with Yakshul and Kavana at the tavern. Tears continued to stream down his face, but he said nothing. He simply turned and silently left the bedchamber, leaving the emperor alone with his dead wife. Kavana held Isbia's remains close and began to weep. After a while, the soldiers reported to him that the king of Alki was finally dead. Now, they could go home, looking at the bodies of enemies and allies alike. Kavana wondered if this was what he wanted, if this was the empire of his dreams. When it was all over, the emperor carried his wife's remains to the Silver Forest. He said that he was now the king of this land and asked the deity to grant his wish to save Isbia. The Silver Forest said that Kavana was a lonely king who had come a long way. However, he was an outsider, so the deity could not grant his wish. He screamed, as the Silver Forest could grant any wish of Alki's ruler. The deity said that was true, but there was a condition. The emperor's wish could not go against the will of the gods. The child's death had already become one of the records of the primordial scripture, and not even the goddess could erase this mark. He collapsed to the ground in despair. If this was all so, then why had he come here? He had hoped to finally see his wife smile again, but she was in a place that even the gods could not reach. Isbia had told him she would take him with her. She had to keep her promise. But if he couldn't bring her back, then he would go to her himself. He drew his sword, intending to end his life, but a voice stopped him. It said that it was too early for Kavana to despair. Looking up, he saw a goddess before him. It was Farka, the goddess who created the Silver Forest and buried her younger sister there. Kavana didn't understand what she meant, why it was too early to give up now. Farka said that Isbia was a lonely, shining star with the power to dim all the evil in the world, and thanks to her light, the world could have bloomed again. But her strength was not enough, and life foolishly and easily left her. She couldn't help Isbia fix everything back then, but she intended to at least give them that chance now. Then the Silver Forest shrieked, saying they couldn't just bring her back. It was too late. Farka said they would reverse time back to a moment when her death was still far off. The goddess turned to the Silver Forest, to her beloved little sister. She asked if she was willing to save Isbia. The Silver Forest said that before becoming one of Farka's children, Isbia had been a guardian, so it was impossible for the goddess not to grieve her loss. However, the balance of this world was already fragile, and neither the Silver Forest nor Farka were as powerful as they once were. The goddess agreed to bring her back, but misfortune would surely befall her again, as fate could not be rewritten. Then Farka said that this was why they needed another chance. She turned to Kavana, saying he had given up everything to get it, to conquer this country. Farka asked if he was ready to fight fate again, to resurrect Isbia by fighting her destiny. He said he would give his life to protect her. The Silver Forest said it was hard to understand Kavana. He had become the Emperor of Riadon, even the King of Alki. He had climbed so high. Why did he want to give it all up now? Then he remembered again the time he spent with Isbia. She said that some flowers only grew in the north, and she promised to show Kavana when they were in Alki. She promised to show him the most beautiful flowers, her favorite books, and everything in the world. The girl said that sometimes there would be Marina for dessert, which she loved very much, but she promised to share it with the boy. They would sit by the fountain in the garden, eat dessert together, and count some interesting things. Kavana smiled and said that it would definitely happen. They would definitely be happy. And now, sitting before the Silver Forest, he said that everything was irrevocably lost. He promised to be his beloved princess's knight, and once back in the past, he would immediately begin searching for Isbia. He promised to do everything in his power not to lose her again. The girl had changed. She had become stronger and wiser than before. When they met, she shouted to the boy that she was taking care of an injured old man, and the boy told her that someone was locked in the stables. Then the boy introduced himself as Marcus. Kavana understood that he couldn't reveal the whole truth yet, as fate couldn't be changed in this life. Dietrich's goal would be to save Isbia, meaning he had to become emperor again and protect her. This was his last chance, and this time he vowed not to miss it. However, now Isbia had been lying in bed unconscious for several days. Kavana hadn't left her side for a minute. The girl's consciousness was still present, but she seemed to be walking in a void without sound or light. Suddenly, somewhere in the darkness, she heard something. Turning around, she saw a man in a red cloak. She stepped forward, wanting to touch his shoulder, and then she realized the man was Kavana. He was holding her lifeless body in his arms and weeping. At that moment, Isbia suddenly moved her hand. Seeing this, the man immediately pressed her hand to his lips and began to cry. He was overjoyed that his wife had awakened. When Isbia was able to get out of bed, Mariana and Simon were immediately called into the bedroom. The doctor said a miracle had happened. There wasn't a single drop of poison left in her body. The Empress had slept for 5 days, and everything was fine with her health. Mariana said that she had been poisoned, and the girl had been unconscious for so many days. But despite that, she had woken up and returned to them. Simon and the maids shed tears of joy. They were ecstatic that the Empress had finally awakened. Isbia then called them to her, hugged them tightly, and said that they would never let this happen again, so they should calm down. However, the girl thought to herself that this time must have been very difficult for them. Kavana didn't show it, but it was incredibly hard for him as well. The protagonist couldn't even imagine how he had felt all these days. Then the girl repeated that everything was fine now, and only then did everyone present in the room calm down. When the couple was left alone, the Emperor said that everyone was very worried about the Empress's condition, and he even had to dissuade Aslan and Yakshal from coming here. Then Isbia decided to ask him how Roman was doing. Kavana said that they were investigating, but the girl had just woken up and shouldn't worry about it. The protagonist thought to herself that her husband didn't yet know that it was Roman who had poisoned her drink. She had thought that on the day of the banquet, so important for the guild, he wouldn't dare to harm her. However, she was wrong. He didn't care about that at all, especially not about selling the cure for multiple sclerosis. The truth was, Roman simply wanted to kill her. In her past life, Dietrich had eliminated her with the help of a sorcerer. He used her death as an excuse to create chaos in the Empire. Then the girl realized that the sorcerer who had obeyed her brother's orders in her past life was clearly Roman. The magic was completely different, so she hadn't noticed immediately. Then she wondered, what if the bodies he had collected were meant to enhance his magical power and change it? Then the girl took her husband's hand and said that she understood it sounded like nonsense, but she needed to see Roman now. If she saw him, she could figure out who was behind the assassination attempt. Kavana looked at his wife warily and said he understood how she felt, but asked her to leave this matter to him. The girl insisted, saying that it was really important and she had to see him. Then the man knelt down and said that he was very afraid that the girl would be in danger again, and if that suddenly happened, he wouldn't be able to bear it. Isbia had almost died in front of him, and he couldn't help but worry about her, as he had almost lost her again. The girl asked him why he was so worried, and if something had happened during this time. The man remained silent, and then she said that if he didn't tell her, she would find out herself. Then the emperor replied that Roman had disappeared. This answer shocked the girl. Kavana told her to calm down. He was about to explain everything. He had already said that Roman had been detained on the same day on suspicion of organizing an attempt on Isbia's life. Aslan interrogated him once a day, and yesterday, when he went to see him at the usual time, he discovered something strange. That day they learned that Roman had transformed a soldier's appearance into his own and then disappeared. Since they hadn't immediately noticed his escape, it was now almost impossible to track him, and one day he might try to harm them again. Kavana said he didn't want to deceive the girl. He just wanted her to rest, at least until she fully recovered. But it was all his fault. He had no right to drag her into this. He said that everything had been wrong from the very beginning, that he had steeped himself in bloodshed for the sake of becoming emperor. He turned around, lowered his head, and said he had ruined Isbia. She didn't understand what he was talking about, and asked why he thought it was all his fault. Then Kavana said he believed there was still a member of the overthrown ruling dynasty alive, and if their country had the power to carry out an assassination attempt on the empress, it was them. Previously, he hadn't worried that they would try to take revenge on him. He thought it was just a potential inconvenience that would have to be dealt with in the future to get rid of slavery and revive the country. He couldn't even imagine what it would turn into. Kavana said it was all his fault. Isbia was hurt because of this. She ran up to him and said he was wrong, that she had decided she had to tell him everything now. She had to say that the person behind Roman was her brother, not the royal family. Then the ghost's voice reappeared in her head. It said that if she told him everything now, then her and her brother's conspiracy would be exposed. The ghost mocked her, asking if she was really that afraid that the emperor would abandon her. The voice said that even Isbia's rebirth wouldn't change anything because of her, the war would start again. If Kavana found out what she was hiding, he would definitely be very angry. He took his wife's hand and placed it on his cheek, saying that as long as she was by his side, he didn't need anything else. So he begged her not to leave him. Isbia wondered how she could leave him alone in this hell. He didn't believe in himself. Everyone he cherished had abandoned him, and she knew from her own experience how terrible that was, yet she was doing the same. Then she clung to the emperor's chest and started to cry. She begged for forgiveness, saying that she had lied to him, that it was all her fault. She said that Roman was a sorcerer. He had used magic to change his appearance and escaped, so the soldiers couldn't understand what had happened. It was her brother, Dietrich, who was behind Roman, not the surviving members of the Fernanda family. It was Dietrich who sent her to the emperor's side to kill him, and then used that as an excuse to declare war on the empire. Kavana asked why she hadn't said anything sooner, and asked for help. She replied that she didn't want to be separated from him. He was so good to her, made her happy. Isbia wished their marriage could last a little longer. She dreamed of bearing him children, giving birth to an heir to the throne, but in reality, she couldn't give him what he wanted so much. But despite this, she dared to love him. Isbia was afraid that if she told him about her brother, her secret would be revealed. She declared that she was barren. She had discovered her infertility shortly before the wedding, but was afraid that if the emperor found out, he would immediately break off the engagement, because when he shared with her what family meant to him, she was afraid he would never forgive her, and therefore couldn't tell him, thus ruining everything. Kavana immediately tried to calm her down, saying that this wasn't true at all, because he had said that he didn't need anyone but her. After all, if he could spend his whole life with Isbia, then he wouldn't be afraid of any trials sent down by the gods. That was all he thought about when he married her. He said that an heir had never been that important to him. He said that he loved Isbia very much, and this feeling warmed his soul deeply. Then she started crying, saying she was very scared. Kavana asked if she was afraid that he loved her. Then Isbia said that she loved him very much too, and that's why she was afraid that one day it would all come crashing down. He decided not to answer, but instead kissed her. Then he unbuttoned her dress, inviting her to bed. Soon the couple were in bed. Kavana undressed his wife and then undressed himself. He hovered over her, gently kissing her hands. Isbia asked him to stop because she didn't know what to do, but the emperor said it was okay. He didn't know either. Then she suggested that this was also training. Kavana grabbed her legs, pulled her down a little, and began to cover her legs with kisses, saying that training was no longer necessary. This was the first time Isbia had seen Kavana like this. He reminded her of someone. He looked like a man she had met a long time ago. Then she told him that she felt like she had seen him before. Kavana just grinned and said she was being silly. He wanted her to think only of him at this moment. The couple spent the whole night immersed in love for each other. When it was all over, the emperor said that she was right. He had indeed met her before. Even then, he realized that he wanted to marry a beautiful girl named Isbia. Beside him, she was neither a princess nor the guardian of Alki. He resorted to a false marriage out of impatience and deeply regretted it. Then, the girl asked why she didn't recognize him. The man replied that he had changed a lot since then. He had to survive. He gave up everything he had. Time after time, he made the wrong choices. If Isbia knew how he had lived, she would be disappointed. But somehow, when he realized the girl didn't remember him, he even felt relieved. She said she wouldn't ask about anything he didn't want to talk about, but that didn't mean she was disappointed in him. She would wait, just as Kavana had done, so that he could open up to her and she could open up to him. It would take a lot of time, but she would never leave him because the moment he came to Alki for her, she chose him. The next morning, the girl asked the emperor again to tell her everything that had happened. She wanted to know what he had been through while she was lying there, and how Roman had escaped. She was very interested in everything. Kavana awkwardly averted his gaze, saying that he was very grateful that she was with him now. However, he wondered if he had gone too far. The girl must be aching all over now. When Isbia understood what he meant, her face immediately turned red. She covered her face with her hands and said it was all right now, that she was fine now. Then she asked him if he had really intended to handle this all by himself, just so as not to disturb her. However, for her, it was more important that they go through all of this together. Isbia wanted to be a real empress. For Kavana, the man looked at the girl in bewilderment, and when she took his hand, his face turned red. He apologized, saying that his mind wasn't clear right now, but he decided to tell her the latest updates, everything he knew. He said that as soon as they learned of Roman's escape, they immediately blocked all exits from the capital and, naturally, interrogated the soldiers on duty that day. They had guard logs, and if the girl wanted to see them, he could get them for her. Other than that, they hadn't found any other clues, and he had only learned from Isbia that Roman was a sorcerer. The girl said that in that case, the information she knew might be useful. She said that the plant had shown her several times how Roman used magic. She saw him collecting corpses. These were the bodies of those who suffered from hardening, their bodies already numb. Then the girl asked the emperor if he remembered that she had said that there was a limit to the magic that everyone could wield. Roman was originally an outstanding sorcerer, but not to the point of exceeding human standards. Now she was worried that he was using those corpses to perform black magic. The bodies of those who died from the plague were kept in the temple, which meant that Roman had his own people there. All this seemed very strange to the girl. Whether Dietrich was behind Roman or not didn't matter, because the inhabitants of the empire were no longer cooperating with the Prince of Alki and that mysterious sorcerer. Moreover, the local nobles and priests were very wary of outsiders and still valued legitimacy. Then Kavana said that this was why he speculated that the assassination attempt was organized by survivors of the Funning dynasty. He used the force that had always supported them, the legitimacy of rule and purity of blood. They constantly preached how different the origins of slaves and nobles were, which ensured the loyalty of the conservatives. The man was sure that among the current nobles, some only pretended to be loyal to the new empire, but in fact they supported the old order. They didn't even care that Fernanda practiced incest to maintain the purity of the bloodline. These nobles only wanted to profit from inequality and slavery. Isbia then understood why the emperor was still trying to find the surviving members of the former dynasty. The man said that when they established the Riadon Empire, they seemed to have disposed of all the heirs. Then he said they were looking for people with silver hair. and purple eyes. Kavana explained that the distinguishing features of the Fernanda family were bright silver hair and violet eyes. As far as he knew, those who didn't meet these criteria were either simply driven out or killed. Isbia rose from her chair and said that Roman was exactly like that. He had silver hair and purple eyes. Dietrich joined forces with Roman, not only because he needed power, but also because they wanted to use the revival of the Fernanda dynasty as a pretext for war. Meanwhile, the story shifts to the estate of another family. A man entered the house. Evelyn Haley said that he had returned earlier than usual. The man was Duke Howard. He said that all those so-called nobles were gathered at the palace. He reported that Count Godu had been detained and the deal had fallen through. At such a crucial moment, if Evelyn had won the Empress's favor, all these suspicions could have been avoided. Evelyn decided to drop the subject and asked him about dinner, but Howard told her to leave him alone. She went upstairs, leaving the man alone with his tea, thinking that there was no one in the world who could help him. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind the door. Startled, he knocked over his cup, shattering it on the threshold. He saw a man in a dark, long cloak with a hood. It was Roman. He asked Howard if he had forgotten his face. The Duke asked him what he was doing there, to which Roman replied that they had things to discuss, and he had every reason to be there. Then he asked Howard why he had betrayed him. He had said that if Howard helped him a few times and didn't interfere, he would give him everything he wanted, but at the most crucial moment, he chose to give it all up. Because of him, he had to intervene, going through hell and high water to arrange the chef incident and confuse everyone. If it weren't for the lack of funds, he would never have gotten involved with a bastard like him. Howard tried to justify himself, saying he only wanted to restore his family's former glory, and Roman's plan was too insane. The man grinned, saying that the Duke hadn't stopped him. He knew what would happen during the banquet. All along, it was he who profited from the sales of the sclerosis medicine, and it was he who passed the information about the future reforms to that eminent duchess, one of the founders of the empire, someone who desired its downfall more than anyone. Horrified, Howard stumbled and fell to the floor. Roman leaned over him and said that he no longer blamed him. He was here to give him another chance. Howard screamed that he didn't need any more chances. He didn't care what tricks Roman was trying to pull this time. The man stretched his palm towards his face, saying that he would show the people their rightful ruler, someone capable of completely overturning this crumbling empire. The next moment, his appearance changed. He said he meant the last representative of the Fernanda dynasty. Now that they had set their sights on her, the Empress would no longer be able to hide, because people like Howard, who knew the true value of power, were helping him. Roman asked him if he knew how he found out, then told Howard that the Emperor would be selling the mining rights to the Mistral mine. He was also able to escape the Imperial Palace right under the Emperor's nose. The man said he had his people in the palace, those who supported him, and the key to brainwashing was magic is desire, the obsession with pure blood, the wariness of strangers, and the greed for power and wealth. All he had to do was promise them that they would get everything they wanted. Roman's magic worked on Howard. The color of his eyes changed, and now he looked more like an obedient doll. Just then, a man entered the building, and Roman turned to him. He said that now the Duke would obey him without question, because there wasn't much time left. It was time to finally reclaim their empire. Meanwhile, the heated discussion between Kavana and Isbia continued. Isbia said that if Roman was indeed a member of the Fernanda dynasty, then it made sense that her brother was now personally preparing to wage war against the empire. The plan was to establish a new state with the support of the former ruling dynasty. That must be why they established the Gia Guild and started selling medicine under the guise of helping plague victims, but actually intending to expand their influence. Isbia thought to herself how foolish she had been in her past life. The war her brother started ended in his defeat, and she couldn't even imagine that there was a more dangerous plan hidden behind it, one that could shake the entire empire. She remembered Dietrich's words, how the sorcerer had promised her a kind of power, a power that could overthrow the emperor, and now she was wondering what kind of power that was. Was it really related to the sclerosis and the Funning dynasty? Isbia understood that she shouldn't blindly believe that she only needed to fear death like in her past life. She had finally been reborn, but had already missed such an opportunity, and now she had no idea what to do. Soon night fell, and the two returned to bed. Isbia was haunted by dreams, in which she returned to the snowy forest. Silver Forest turned to her, asking if she was sleeping. The goddess asked the girl if she was having a sweet dream. When Isbia realized where she was, she immediately screamed in terror. It wasn't a dream. The corpses of ordinary people lay before her. A little girl crying over her mother's body, while a soldier with a giant sword approached her. Isbia tried to stop him, but her voice seemed too weak to be heard. She turned to Silver Forest, saying that a child was in danger there. However, the goddess said that Isbia was already dead, and she couldn't do anything but watch everything that was happening there. Then, Isbia suddenly stood up and ran towards the little girl. However, she couldn't escape the place she was in. Her whole body seemed to be bound by chains. Silver Forest told her to stop, that she was powerless against them. But Isbia didn't give up, saying she couldn't give up so easily. She was powerless and unable to change anything, but she would never give up. Just as the soldier raised his sword, aiming it at the little girl's body, Isbia suddenly jumped up from the ground. At the last moment, managed to grab the girl and push her away, dodging the blow. Silver Forest then spoke to her, saying that Isbia ultimately chose suffering, which was why she entrusted their fate to her. As Isbia looked down, she saw not a little girl looking back at her, but a goddess. Now she realized that this was Silver Forest. The goddess said to forget it. There was no need to fear Roman, because in a past life, she had entrusted their fate to her. Silver Forest said that the fate of the world was in her hands. She knew how to defeat Roman. She knew the solution, but she had simply forgotten. But the goddess would help her. She would restore her true power. Silver Forest kissed the girl's forehead, asking her to save this world. In the morning, Isbia pondered what she had dreamed of. After moving to the Riadon Empire, she had no contact with Silver Forest, and even in the book, there was never a mention of a case where she appeared before a guardian in this way. Isbia doubted whether she could handle all of this. Silver Forest had entrusted the fate of the entire kingdom to her. Hope bloomed in her heart that this time, the Alki kingdom would not become a victim of war. Isbia walked over to the pot she used for magic practice, understanding that she had to do everything possible to find a way to fight Roman. However, at that moment, her strength gave out and she fell asleep on the sofa. After a while, Kavana woke her up, asking why she was still here. He asked if she had really exhausted all her strength. The fact was, a seedling had sprouted in a pot on the table next to her. Isbia immediately rushed to the pot, unable to believe her ears. A seedling had really sprouted from the soil. She was shocked, as she was quite sure there had been nothing there before. Suddenly, the petals transformed into a huge root, instantly shooting upwards. Kavana managed to push Isbia away from the pot at the last moment, so she wouldn't be hit. Moments later, it had grown to the ceiling, its branches spreading in all directions. Neither of them understood what it was. Then Isbia decided to tell the Emperor about her dream. She said that long ago, when she first met Silver Forest and saw it in a dream, it said it would return her true power, and she realized that it wasn't a simple dream. However, Isbia hadn't expected this power to be so strong, even though she thought she should have more power. The Emperor walked over to the roots and touched them, then said that it was an unusual stem. The tree seemed to be filled with magic, and the magic power contained within it was far greater than all the plants Isbia had grown before. Isbia believed this was a divine revelation given to her by the goddess Silver Forest. The goddess had said that she entrusted the fate of the whole world to her. It was known that all guardians became weaker after leaving Arcadia, and the power granted to her to protect the kingdom also seemed to have evaporated. However, while she was in the Empire, Silver Forest returned her power. Isbia firmly believed that she had to save the world, and to do so, she had to defeat Roman. She hugged the Emperor tightly, saying she was very happy, because she could help. Kavana looked at the table again, where the pot with the huge plant sat, and said it was very cool. Soon night fell, and Isbia returned to her bedroom to sleep. Suddenly, something woke her up. When she opened her eyes, she realized there was a man standing in the room. When Isbia saw the man's face, she was very surprised. It was Kavana. She said he really scared her and asked when he came back. He pointed her leg and said she was injured. Isbia guessed that she had accidentally injured herself when the stem grew, but she hadn't even noticed. The Emperor said that he was very saddened by her words about how useless she was today, and he couldn't even imagine how many people. Isbia tried to prove her worth, yet none of them, not even herself, had anticipated how much pain it would bring her. Not even herself. Suddenly, Isbia saw the emperor crying. He said he had always been so pathetic. He learned what kind of burden Isbia had to bear. Yet he allowed himself to be captivated by her light, and she had saved him. And now he dared to think he could protect her, which made him feel terrible. Isbia asked what he was talking about, and Kavana replied that he was still the same as when she pulled him out of that stable. Isbia asked how he knew about the stable. She remembered that day, and the boy introduced himself as Marcus. She couldn't believe Marcus was her husband, Kavana. Then it all became clear. When she was little, she found a boy around her age in the stable, and they wanted to go north together. But he disappeared, and no matter how hard she searched, she couldn't find him. Kavana said he had used the false name Marcus, and he was ashamed and afraid that the girl would remember in the future, because the sun itself had descended and saved that lowly, mud-in, blood-covered third son. He was so ashamed he couldn't bear it, so he didn't dare confess to the girl. In truth, he also wanted to save Isbia. He wanted to become a true knight for her, just like the girl had been. He was willing to do anything just to be with her. Then Kavana asked his wife if she knew why he named the empire Riadon. The truth was, long ago, it was in the Riadon Mountains that Isbia found him. The girl was shocked. She began to understand who the important person the emperor had mentioned was. Even their political marriage was just a means to meet her. Everything was because of her. Isbia said she didn't save him. Kavana escaped from the stable himself, and later he started the revolution. He liberated tens of thousands of oppressed slaves. All of this was entirely Kavana's achievement. Then the girl reached out and embraced the emperor and kissed him, saying he didn't need to feel ashamed anymore. She hadn't understood him before, but she had been searching for the bravest knight she had ever met for too long. She apologized for not recognizing him immediately. She also thanked him for coming back to find her. Isbia remembered some fragments of her past life. When she was dying, Kavana didn't abandon her. Now she understood. Silver Forest had said that she entrusted the fate of the entire world to her. But in her opinion, it was only because of this person that she could understand the weight of it all. The couple spent another night together, unable to resist the urge to be close to each other. Now Isbia held Kavana's life in her hands, and she would do anything to save it. Noticing the tears in his wife's eyes, the emperor asked if she was in pain. The girl realized she wanted to be responsible for all the lives Silver Forest had entrusted to her. Then she said that now she had finally met Kavana. She was very happy. Isbia realized that she would never return to her past fate. When everything was over, the emperor brought the work log to the girl for her to review. Perhaps she would find something suspicious. As he said, it detailed what everyone was doing every hour. If you didn't look carefully, you might not notice any particular details. Then the girl asked Kavana if he found anything strange about this part of the document. Isbia felt something was wrong, but she couldn't say what exactly. She asked Kavana to tell her again about the conditions of Roman's imprisonment. The man smiled and said he would tell her anything she wanted to know. The emperor said the document indicated the layout of the room he was in. During the day, there were no windows in the room. The door was opened only twice a day, and even for just delivering food, 2 soldiers were sent. Isidore said that no matter how powerful Roman was, he couldn't deal with 2 people at the same time without attracting attention. Kavana told her not to rush. The girl could take her time with the investigation and think everything through slowly. He would continue to handle the affairs of the empire. The girl smiled and said that the man could relieve her of her duties as empress now, because there was no problem that couldn't be solved in the name of the emperor. Just then, the girl suddenly thought of something. She said the key was in the names. All the guards stood watch with their respective partners for a certain amount of time, with only one exception. It was written here that he had only rotated once with all the soldiers on duty at different times. They urgently needed to interrogate this person, but the emperor said there might be a problem because this person was the very soldier Roman had impersonated. He hadn't regained consciousness since the attack, so he was immediately ruled out as a suspect. The girl felt that all of this was simply illogical. There had to be something wrong. She just hadn't figured it out yet. Isbia suggested that it might be the work of a spy, as Roman and her brother had started using spies long ago. One of them was Baron Edwin. When he spoke to Marianne, he made it clear that there were others besides him. Roman was guarded by 2 guards. If one of them was a spy, it meant that Roman used him to deal with the other guard, then disguised himself as the other person and slipped away. The way working hours were arranged made it so that no one could remember the soldiers' features or their shifts. This was the case for everyone. That would make it easier to identify the spy, so Isbia decided to ask which high-ranking officials could modify those documents. The emperor replied that it could only be Aslan or Axa. Kavana said that Roman almost killed Isbia, so of course he instructed his closest aides to monitor Roman. Therefore, besides himself, only those two could influence the work schedule. Isbia said she was probably jumping to conclusions too quickly. It was just her guess, not necessarily the truth. However, the emperor was nervous. He said he should immediately interrogate Aslan and Axa and have them followed. Isbia said he should trust his friends, but Kavana said this sort of thing had happened before. And he should have expected it to happen again. You can't trust anyone. As a result, he almost ruined everything again. Hearing these words, Isbia immediately embraced him, saying she understood how he felt. When she discovered her brother wanted to kill her, she felt so alone, she suspected everyone. However, after meeting the emperor, she realized that no matter what happened, she shouldn't let her trust in people completely disappear. She also hoped Kavana wouldn't torture himself like she had before. Isbia promised to find out the whole truth. She promised to find out where Roman was hiding and who the spy was, so Kavana wouldn't have to give up on his people. The next morning, Isbia went to the underground laboratory. She thought there must be a way to find Roman without interrogating Aslan or Axa. If she thought about it carefully, it was clearly related to the hardening disease. As soon as they discovered that the disease was spreading through the Fiha River, Roman appeared immediately. If Isbia started developing the antidote again, they wouldn't even have to look for him. It sounded crazy, but Isbia didn't care. She wanted to protect Kavana, just as he wanted to protect her, and she would use her power to do so. She was going to create a lure to catch Roman. Isbia used her power, and suddenly a strange sound came from the flower pot behind her. A moment later, a small, green sprout emerged from the flower pot.